I decided I was going to run away from home. I got jumped in Helen Keller Park, robbing, burglarizing, selling dope. I tried it all. I was on a track to either killing somebody or killing myself. He says, "Go over, white boy." It's like, all right, man. I scoot over, and he sits down. As soon as he sits down, I jump up and boom, I rack him, drop him off of the thing, and now I'm on him. Boom, 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 boom.
Tyler Corcoran is one of the most remarkable individuals I've ever spoken with. He grew up in a working-class family in Lancaster, California, but at the age of 14, Tyler ran away from home and joined the Crips street gang in South Central Los Angeles. Seriously, he was a fully fledged white Crip gang member with the 120 Raymond Crips. He got jumped in and everything. Wild. Then, at the age of 17, he caught an attempted robbery case in Lancaster, got tried as an adult, and was sentenced to 80 years to life, one of the harshest sentences in the history of California. He served time on level 4 yards all over the state, gangbanging alongside his Raymond brothers. He was involved in numerous prison riots, went to the shoe a bunch of times, and was nearly killed during a brawl on the yard when a skinhead sliced him across the neck. But a few years into his stretch, Tyler began to change. He'd outgrown the gang life. He decided to drop out and then underwent a complete spiritual and mental transformation. He accepted his life sentence, and instead of fighting it, he became the best version of himself, all while living in the hell that is maximum security prison. Years later, after criminal reforms took place in California, Tyler's case went back before a judge for resentencing. And after 19 years of his life inside of some of the worst prisons in America, Tyler was released with time served. And just a few years after getting released, he's got an amazing life. He has a new family, and he's developing his life story with top Hollywood production companies as we speak. For more with Tyler, including how he survived and thrived after coming home from prison, head over to Patreon, patreon.com/TheConnectShow. Ladies and gentlemen, this episode left me speechless. I hope it inspires you as much as it did me. Tyler Corcoran, right here on The Connect with Johnny Mitchell.
They shut down the day rooms completely because of the amount of murders that were taking place. I got snatched into a room and beat unconscious by the white boys I didn't even make it to my cell. Next thing I know, I woke up, there's blood everywhere, and this cop standing over me. I got sliced from here all the way to here. They're gonna eventually kill you. If you tell me right now that you wanna change your life and that you wanna stop this, your life will be drastically different. And I looked at her and I said, let's do it. It took radical accountability in my life for me to be able to move forward and grow,
right,
and continue to expand.
Yeah.
So that way I didn't stay that same kind of small-minded mentality that I had when I was a gang member and all of that.
How long did it take you to kind of grow into that?
I mean, it's still growing, right? Like it's an ongoing process, but for me, it began when I was in my early 20s.
Okay.
And I was at a place in my life where I couldn't see the future, right? I couldn't continue going on. I was sick of the violence. I was sick of the politics. I was sick of like survival, right? And I was looking more from the perspective of maturity and saying like, what is my next 10 years? I got life in prison at this point. Pills are done. It's a wrap. And the only way for me to cope was to, try to grow and all of that. And so I knew that I had to get away from the gangs because it was just consuming all of my attention in order to be able to survive.
What year did you go down?
January of 2003.
Okay, so this is long before California started to liberalize and people that have life without parole, as we're seeing now, are getting out. So you really thought you had all day.
Yeah, so my case was published, right? And it set precedent because it started out as an attempted armed robbery where I was facing 16 months in camp. And when I wouldn't cooperate or anything like that, I rode the case for my entire crew. And when I wouldn't cooperate with the district attorney, they amended the charges. They tried me as an adult, and they turned it into kidnap for robbery because the people were moved a certain amount of feet in the building, right? Like I didn't even take the money. So it set precedent in two different ways. One is that it established a new standard of what kidnap for robbery could be in the state of California. And then the other thing that it did, and this was through much advocacy and all of that, and I'll tell you about how I came home and all of those different things, right? Is that I was the only juvenile that they could find in the history of American law who had been sentenced to the equivalent of life without, where nobody had been physically harmed, no firearm had been discharged, I had no past criminal record, and they gave me the equivalent of life without in prison.
It's so egregious, and for anybody who thinks that California is this kind of lawless haven for criminals, perhaps it's swung too far the other way in recent years since COVID and, with the smash and grabs and stuff like that. But it was ground zero for the 3 strikes law. Tons of cases, a lot where you hear, a guy had a nonviolent 3rd strike and, he stole something and now he's doing 25 with an L. They've since repealed that. But I mean, it was militaristic and draconian and brutal for a lot of years, and you were part of that dragnet.
Absolutely, yeah.
So tell us where you're from and the crew that you had coming up.
Okay, so I'm from Lancaster, California, right? The Antelope Valley. It's the last town northeast in LA County, right before you hit Kern County. And my childhood was much different because it was very rural, right? Like my parents had moved from San Luis Obispo when I was a little kid down there. And my dad worked for waste management for the dump out there, right? And so we lived in an area called Antelope Acres, which was all dirt roads. And but it was very impoverished in a lot of ways because it was all agriculture, and they had kind of like overworked the aquifer out there. And so they sold a lot of their land to the government for development, and nothing got developed, and it's just this little place, right? And it's exploded since then in population because they started to do things like housing incentives, Section 8. They built the prison in order to boost the economy, right? So it wasn't all dependent on the base and all that. And but when I first was out there, it was still very small and very rural. It was outlawish because there was a lot of bikers and like skinheads and trailer parks and things like that. It was more considered like white trash. But it was, but I didn't really grow up in that. My parents weren't, my dad wasn't like, he was a hardworking guy. And he was the responsible one. And my mother was the one who was like gone. She would leave us for, days at a time or whatever, right? In order to be able to go and party or be out and all of that.
She was on dope?
She wasn't on dope. She just, I think she had a mental illness, and it led to a bitter custody battle between my parents, which started around, I don't know, my brothers and sister and I were very young. And so we kind of grew up with them always battling back and forth for custody. And by the time I was about 14 years old, she had lost all parental rights and couldn't be around us. And it was around that time that I decided I was going to run away from home. I just was like, I was getting into trouble. I was very angry. I was resentful towards my parents and really adults and authority figure in general. And so I took off and I went into the streets, and Lancaster has a pretty rough scene out there. And I fell in with one of the locals, but his family had moved out from LA, from South Central. And his older brother had come home from the pen. And when I was hanging out with his little brother all the time, he kind of like took interest in me in a way and started to groom me as his little homie. And then that's how I ended up going down to Los Angeles and becoming a Crip.
Yeah, this is almost unprecedented as a white Crip. I mean, I've heard of a few of them now since the internet's been coming out.
Yeah, I see a lot of them on the internet.
You always see the one Chinese Crip who's like making TikToks.
I mean, you'd be surprised. It's a pretty diverse, even when I came in, it was pretty diverse, right? I was the only white dude from my neighborhood, though, meaning the Crip, gang that I was from.
What sect of the Crip?
I was from a gang called Raymond Avenue. And there's really like 3 chapters, I guess you would call: Pasadena, Ingle Watts, and South Central, 120, 10 Deuce, and I was from 120. The other thing that was also kind of unusual was I wasn't put on in juvenile hall. I wasn't like put on in Lancaster, right? I got jumped in Helen Keller Park. It was a big thing, 10 Deuce Day, right? And the Raymonds had a lot of love for me, for sure. I got nothing bad to say about the Raymonds.
Imagine how funny it is to say I got jumped into the Crips as a white guy in Helen Keller Park.
I know. What's funny is like I don't even think about who that is until later on, right?
Exactly. Look her up if you don't know who she is.
Yeah, seriously.
American hero, like folk hero.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, so are you down in Compton on 120th? Or
No,
is
so it's
that,
not Compton. It's on the
or South
borderline
Central?
of, it's on the borderline of South Central and Gardena. You get down, if you're taking, say, for example, Vermont, right? And what is it? Vermont goes east and west, and then, whatever goes north and south, I think. I can't remember. But if you're on Vermont and you're taking it all the way down towards Gardena, you're going to hit El Segundo.
Right.
And the gang's territory is in between Imperial and El Segundo. At least when I was out, things change, streets shift and power struggles shift,
but it's
and all
still
that, but-
it's still rough down there.
Oh yeah,
it's
that's
still
it's the Rolling Hunters. It's those guys that's an old, very respected neighborhood.
Yeah.
When I went to the pen, it saved me in a lot of ways from the naivety, right, of my situation, because they were on the higher levels, level 4s and 180s and things like that. They were a very well-respected, serious guys, and so when I landed on the yard, I had a lot of support from not just them, also from surrounding Crip gangs, even all types of different guys.
When you're 14, and that's such a wild move to leave this dusty little town of Lancaster and be way south, deep in the heart of gang territory in South Central LA, especially in the early 2000s, the late 90s, when it's still really, really just gangbanging.
It was real.
As we see it now, the people are still flagging, I assume, and stuff that you don't see anymore.
Yeah.
But people probably images that we would associate with the 80s and 90s of LA, you probably witnessed.
Yeah, and exactly, the dress code was, you wore, it was like Chucks and Dickies, and you proudly had your blue flag in your left pocket, right? And all of these different types of nuances.
Yeah.
And that I don't know what it's like really anymore, because in coming home, one is I was away for so long, but in coming home, I really exploded into a completely different socioeconomic status. So I didn't have to parole back to those types of places. I was first in Compton. My parole office was in Compton, but I quickly transferred out to, the Woodland Hills and all that area.
I think it's changed from who I've talked to that used to be involved and actually going down there. I mean, they take you to jail so quick that I think they really had to go indoors, and be camouflaged within
I think it's social media. I think a lot of it's gangbanging on social media. It's very real,
for sure,
because there's still very real murders that are being committed. There's crimes are definitely being committed. Young guys are still coming in, which I was a big part of mentoring when they would come into the institutions.
Wow.
But it changed, as far as hairstyles, tattoo. When I came in, you didn't see a lot of dudes, especially black dudes, that had tattoos all over their faces and their arms. They weren't really sleeved down. They would have their neighborhood blasted across the chest, or the numbers on your back arm and that type of thing. It was mainly the essays and the white boys that were tatted like that. Yeah. But that changed, right? And that was another big thing too. I would see these young guys come in, and they would have, with a shirt on, they would have their necks completely wrapped, their faces blasted back, their hands all done. They would take their shirt off and have no tattoos. And in the pen, it was the reverse, right? That was the spaces you did last.
Right.
Those were the things that
I've run out of room.
Yeah, you just go to that, so it's changed.
Okay, so what value at 14 does a white kid have to the Crips? The 120 Crips.
Well, I mean, there's a few different things. One is that you also have just very real young guys that are going through the same thing and then just want to feel accepted too. So say as an example, when it was my crew, right? Because you have crews within gangs and all that type of thing. But my main guys, they were all like me. They were runaways, right? We would all sleep in we would put the dryer on in the wintertime, right? To stay warm, and smoke weed, hotbox the laundry room in some shot out apartment complex, And they just really wanted to feel the same thing that I did, which was the kind of sense of purpose. And so the value was me wanting it as bad as they did, right? And wanting this acceptance as much as they did. That's some of the value. The other thing is for the older guys, it doesn't matter as one more person to do the crime for them, right? Because they're, when you graduate and you get a little bit older, if you survive that long, then usually you groom a little homie to do that for for you. You don't hold the pistol anymore, right? Flo only holds the pistol, or the dope gets out the car and runs, and you skirt off with the car, kind of thing. So it's hard to say what it's like. It's kind of like a whole combination of those things, of the value that I had.
What was the structure of the Crips, or what is the structure of the Crips in terms of their hierarchy and the way they make money?
Yeah.
How organized is it?
Not very organized. It's not as organized as some of the other cultures and stuff like that. It's very tribal in that way. Usually it's like an older dude. He usually has like 3 or 4 little homies, and those guys got friends, type of thing. The organization's it's just loose. It's usually petty, my experience anyways, right? It was like petty crime, graduating to something maybe being like a strong arm robbery, then armed robbery, knocking over a bank if you get a part of somebody that's a little more sophisticated in that way. But the gang as a whole isn't like that. There's not necessarily a structure. When you go to prison, it's different, and the structure changed. The gang that I was from was a more militant gang on the inside. And so they were, it was like, you don't mess with prison punks, you don't gamble, you don't get in debt, right? You don't use dope, you smoke a little bit of weed, drink a little bit of wine, but you don't around with the other stuff. And so there was, you work out, roll your mat up, like clean your cell. There's like standards in that way. But as far as like a sophisticated criminal enterprise, it doesn't fall underneath one structure like that.
So you didn't have to like kick up mafia style to the hierarchy, to the older homies when you hit a score, or you sold some dope or whatever. Okay.
No, you do like maybe at a funeral, guys would come around, pass a hat around and stuff like that,
So what were you guys doing as teenagers to make money?
Yeah, I mean, with robbing, burglarizing, selling dope. I tried it all. And eventually that's what I ended up getting busted for, was for the robberies, I think that's another reason why I didn't feel this sense of like I was a victim, right? And it really helped me get past that, was because even though I was sentenced to life, right, it was such an extreme sentence for the crime that I committed. Now looking back at it, I'm happy, because I was on a track to either killing somebody or killing myself. And I just see what that does to people and what it would have done to me. And it's like, I'm so happy that just never happened,
right?
Were
you selling crack?
No, it was crystal, right? Because crack was like, nobody was really like doing crack like that. Crack was on its way out. It was phasing out, and crystal was taking over, especially as more and more people from the inner city were going out to the outskirts of LA County. Right. So like I tried selling crystal, I tried selling weed. I wasn't good at either one. The weed I would smoke, and the crystal I would like give away because I felt bad.
So are black people were into crystal?
Yeah. The drugs are non-discriminate, Yeah, that crystal meth really took over. That was another thing that changed with a lot of young dudes that were coming in. Was from my era, you were looked at like a basehead for that. Like you were looked at like kind of down on for if you did any types of powders or harder drugs. The only thing that people gave a pass on was sometimes powder cocaine, but they would only really let the dudes from the projects get that pass, like bounty hunters from Jordan Downs and Grape and that type of thing. Or up north, the Kumis and the 415s. The only really thing that was accepted was sherm, weed, and alcohol. Yeah. You could smoke some angel dust or dip, whatever you want to call it.
Everything else is for sale. It's for resale to the dope fiends.
Everything else is for sale. Yeah. Everything is like you get it, you sell it, and that type of stuff.
And you're doing like petty robberies. You have a gun on you? Like you carry a gun like a gang member?
Yeah.
And you're flagging? Like you got the flag in your
serious.
pocket?
I was an active, gang member. And you're not going to be from Raymond, like hanging out down there and not doing anything, or you're not going to take it back out to Lancaster and not do anything. And I think a big part of me was that I always wanted to be considered real in everything that I did. So I always put myself into it. I think that's why my change really like stuck in that type of way, was the moment that I started to feel like kind of like a hypocrite in a lot of different ways, or even appropriating, right? Another culture's identity in a lot of different ways, right? Even like a street culture identity. It's not like I came from the streets in that way. And I started to feel like, in some ways, like a method actor, right? Who was just performing because I didn't feel good about any of it.
Right.
I loved the camaraderie and I loved having like my boys who we were like the world to, right? But I didn't feel good about having to DP this person or that person got stabbed. I was so sick of the gossip. Gang members are really gossipy in a lot of ways, right? It's always about who did this and who did that and who's no good and all this. And when you do enough time, you realize that it's like everybody has something to say about everybody else.
Yeah.
You know, even the dudes that are good, you got somebody saying is no good, you know, until they get found out or whatever.
That's really interesting. You felt like you were culturally appropriating before people use that kind of terminology. You kind of felt like an imposter.
Yeah, I did, because my thing was like, I never used the N-word because I felt like it was disrespect. Right.
Man, you missed a golden opportunity, dude. I would have been, that's the only reason I would join the Crips.
I never did. It was never my thing, you know, and I knew guys that did. There was other.
You knew white guys.
Yeah, there was other white Crips that I ended up getting around. We were very few and far between at this time in the system. Right. You know, it was Snow Rock from 40s down in San Diego. It was Die Hard from Southside Pomona Village. It was Old Man from Fort Trey, who knows where he was at, right? Some of the older guys, they had kind of like phased out on the streets. Right. It was, I was in a full-blown riot over me, and I had one of my best guys that was right there next to me, man, help protecting me, and we were just back to back with it, was Gary Boland from West Side Modesto, right? And he was this white dude, you know, from Modesto that was a Crip.
Right.
And, you know, but was a G. And so we would land very, very rarely would we land on yards together, because usually what happens is as soon as you land on that, when you're on a higher level, 3, 2, and 1, there's like ways that people get around it. But when you're on a 4-yard and you're on a 180 yard, there's no politicking out of that. You know, it's gonna happen. And it doesn't matter how much, even my homies, they used to tell me, I don't trip, we're gonna go talk to these dudes and get this settled in this. And I said, man, they would just put in a fake medical slip for me to get called. I'd get a ducat, go out and get smashed on, you know, because they're trying to ambush me and all types of.
So there's no talking it out on a level 4.
There's no talking it out. Talking it out just means delaying the process so everybody can get armed.
I see.
That's it.
I see. Okay, before we get to the pen, when you're still on the streets, obviously you have to get jumped in. Yeah. Tell us about getting jumped in.
Yeah. So 10 Deuce Day is, you know, it's a major day in the neighborhood where all the 3 factions get together and they celebrate the birth of Raymond Crips, right? And it's a time for everybody to, you know, the park is full, man. You just see hundreds of Crips. When I first saw it, I was like, oh, this is my dream. This is the realest, you know, in this type of way. But they're shooting their dice and dudes are getting into fist fights and
40s like, everywhere, oldies and
40s smoking weed and like low riders and, you know, all these different things. Yeah, it was, and so Helen Keller Park is the hub of the Raymonds, right, at that time. And
where is it? What
it's
address?
Off 120th in Vermont. It's like, it's kind of, yeah. You got to go down a little bit further, maybe to 123rd, but it's in that general area right there. And it's just a park right off the side of Vermont, right? It's like, and everybody gets put on there who's gonna be from the neighborhood. And so I remember the night that it was gonna be me and everybody's there, and this dude who was I don't want to name too many names and all that type, because, you know, it's not about that, but this dude that was kind of like my sponsor, right? The dude that I looked up to, tells me, he goes, yo, we're gonna put him on, right? And you ready? And I remember I looked at everybody and I felt like this was like, this is why I say kind of like an actor in a sense, is I felt like I was on a stage, you know, everybody was looking at me. And I remember I just like started to unbutton my Pendleton, right? I didn't even say anything. I just was like, I'm gonna be cool, right? Unbutton this, and I hung it over the fence. And they say it's going to be right over here. And there's like this waist high chain link fence where the light pole's at, and the light pole comes down. And I remember the light beaming down onto the grass. And so I grab the fence and I jump over into the clear space. And one dude jumps over behind me, boom, right? Crazy part is 3 months later, that dude got killed. So he jumps over behind me. And as soon as he lands, I turn around and he rushes me. boom, 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 boom. So we start getting them up. And one thing is that I was always like really athletic and I was always tough and I grew up with brothers and like all this different, and people think that Lancaster was soft, but it wasn't, you know. The white boys out there, they get busy and I was one of them. And so I put this dude down, right? Boom, 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 boom. I box him down, he gets dropped. And so another guy jumps over. Boom. And when another guy jumps over, the other one gets up and the two rush me now. Bam, 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 bam. Now I'm getting him up with both of them and I'm holding my own. And so a third one jumps over. And when a third one jumped over, right, we really start getting it. And so we go for a certain amount of time and it wasn't that bad. I wasn't even as busted up as probably a couple of dudes that were there with me, right? And afterwards, man, it was this huge celebration, right? Everybody was like, oh, and they came up and they were hugging me and all this stuff. And I just remember I felt so good. Yeah. And I was like really proud of myself for like going through this thing that I felt like scared to do and like all this different stuff.
Mad respect.
Yeah. And so we go to, and I'm still like reeling with being down in LA, you know, because it wasn't much longer after I had been down there that I got jumped in. And so we go to this club and everybody's inside and they're crip walking and there's, you know, there's chicks that are dancing, all this different type of stuff. And I'm out front. And as I'm out front, I see these two guys starting to walk up to the street. So we bang on them, right? And when we bang on them, this car comes skirting out around this alleyway and drives up and runs these two dudes over. Boom, boom, boom. And then skirts off around the corner, stops, side doors open up, two dudes jump out of the car, run, jump onto a public bus, and the bus takes off. And I'm looking at it like, what the f just happened, right? Because then it felt, you know, so real in that moment.
Yeah. So you went from like, oh, I'm like a triumphant moment to like a holy.
To like a holy. Yeah.
This is what you signed up for.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is what I signed up for. But, you know, I was like, it was just another moment of me seeing the reality of it and feeling like I was okay, this is the real deal and this is what I was asking for and all this different type of thing.
Did you yourself have to put in work after you got jumped in?
I mean, I was already putting in work in the sense of like with the guy that my sponsor guy that kind of took me down there and all this type of thing. But this is what I mean by there's no like, it's not like, okay, now all of a sudden you need to go put in work, go across this way, find an enemy, shoot an enemy. I didn't experience that, you know. Instead, I just experienced now you're allowed to be in this area. And then it was like every now and again we would come up with an idea for a crime, but so much of the in-between was also just us spent young dudes smoking weed, hanging out in the park all day. Yeah. Maybe some enemies would come through, bust on us, bah, 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 right? And then we'd like scurry off or whatever. Some dudes would shoot back, bah, bah, bah. And then the whole neighborhood would be talking about it. Everybody would get away because the cops are coming. And then you're kind of just back out there hanging out again. Yeah. So I didn't really live that life of where it was like I needed to necessarily go put in all this work.
Yeah. Today's episode is sponsored by Policy Genius. Do you guys know that most people with life insurance policies wish they had gotten them at a younger age? I don't even have a family of my own yet, but I still got a life insurance policy using Policy Genius. They hooked me up with a policy under $300 a year that pays out $1 million in life insurance coverage. That's really good for something so cheap. Policy Genius combines digital tools with the expertise of real licensed agents. So basically, it aggregates your needs and pairs you with the best life insurance policy. It allows you to compare quotes from America's top insurers side by side for free with no hidden fees. They answer questions, handle paperwork, and advocate for you throughout the process. This is so much easier than actually having to find a life insurance agent. They just put you on their website. You can get it all done in a matter of minutes. And it's so important, especially if you have family, especially if you have some wealth, a home. You want that to get passed on to your loved ones appropriately and timely upon your passing. Hopefully that's not for a long time, but feel secure. And that's the point. That's why I got this thing. It was so easy. I wish I had got it younger. Remember, life insurance is a form of financial planning, and Policy Genius is the country's leading leading online insurance marketplace. Secure your families tomorrow so you have peace of mind today. Head to policygenius.com or click the link in the description of this episode to get your free life insurance quotes and see how much you can save. Again, under $300 a year got me over $1 million worth of coverage. That's Policy Genius. PolicyGenius.com. Today's episode is sponsored by my favorite, Prize Picks. If you guys like firing on action, I mean, you know what it is by now. You're a fan of the show. These are not professionals. All you got to do is bet more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections. That's it. A dummy like me, a casual sports fan, can do it. You damn sure can do it. All right? Check it out. Baseball season is here. Thank God. Don't miss your chance to add your favorite players from the diamond in your Prize Picks lineup, whether it's strikeouts, RBIs, first inning outs. There are so many different plays to 1000x your cash today. And what's so dope about Prize Picks is you can mix and match player projections from different sports. What? I didn't even know about that. Combine your favorite baseball players with players from basketball, hockey, esports, and much, much more. You guys know what it is. You're rabid. You guys are rabid. You're on this. You're making your living off of this, dude. You guys are sharks. Now Prize Picks offers Venmo, Apple Pay, MasterCard, and more for quick and easy deposits into your account this sports season. And let me hit you with the big kahuna. Sign up today and get $50 instantly when you play just $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. They're giving you money to get in the game, guys, okay? You're like the corner boy, and Marlo hits you off with a pack, and now you're slanging red tops, okay? You didn't even need to do anything. He just puts you on. You don't even have to come with your own bread. Just $5. Prize Picks also offers weekly promotions that can lead to big payouts like Taco Tuesday. Each Tuesday, Prize Picks discounts select player projections up to 25% to provide even more value for your lineups. Download the app today and use code CONNECT to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Once again, that's promo code CONNECT to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run yo mother game.
It sounds a lot like prison gangbanging like that. Like most of the 80% of the time, nothing is happening. 85% of the time.
So, yeah, because 80% of the time you're in the cell.
Right.
You know, so it's like there's really nothing except talk being, happening. The thing that really cemented me was I had saved a guy's life, right, that was from the neighborhood on another day that we have called 120 Day, and it was in front of everybody. And I won't go through all of the specifics, because it was a real situation, and I don't want to I just don't want to do that, right? But at the same time, what did happen, and everybody from Raymond knows it, is that I saved this dude's life. And that was the thing that then made it so that way they were like, this dude is really from the neighborhood. Doesn't matter who his sponsor is, none of these types of things. And then I got real love from the guys that were right there that had witnessed it. And that was the thing that made it so that way when I went to prison, when I went to jail, when I went to juvenile hall, they claimed me. I landed on the yard and dudes weren't like, is this dude? I landed on the yard and they were like, man, the little homie's here and we're gonna try to sort this out and this.
So you got a stripe.
I got stripes because of it. And then I got busted not too much longer after that. And so when I went to juvenile hall, I was very active, and then when I went to county, I was mainline GP through all these different things. And I wasn't turning down fades. I was going into any tank that the cops put me in. I was just doing the full blown thing. And so I continued to earn more and more stripes while I was on the inside.
Okay, so the crime that changes your whole life, it's barely a crime, really.
Yeah.
It was kind of just premeditated.
Yeah.
Tell us about it. What was it down in the neighborhood? Was it down?
No, so it was in Lancaster. So what we used to do was we would go out to the city, hit some licks, right, or do a couple robberies type of thing, and then we would go back out to Lancaster, lay low, right? Or we would hit a couple licks in Lancaster, and then we would go out to the city and lay low, right? So it was, and so, anyways, when the idea came up about this bingo hall, right, and it was this United Desert Charities. It's so embarrassing. Fucking. Right.
You know what we say in the pen, bro. Nobody got away with it. We're all embarrassed.
Yeah, I mean, it's embarrassing in the sense of God damn, man, you had to go try to rob a bunch of old people.
Right.
What the
that is wild.
Yeah, but anyways, it wasn't like that. It was this. it was this hall that you can rent out for all types of things, and bingo was one of them. And so what we decided to do was we were going to go into the building at like 9, 10 a.m. the day after the bingo, but the night before they were going to run the next one, because they were going to have the most cash. Yeah. And we were estimating to have like 50 G's in there or something like that, right? And
good score.
Yeah, it was way less, and we didn't get any, right? But it was like 20, I think, actually. But yeah, so it was me and two of the other homies, right? And my role, I was going to hold the gun and point it and make sure that everybody was cooperating in that way. And then the dude that was coming in with me, he was going to be the one that was going to grab the money and do all this different type of stuff. And so 10 o'clock in the morning, man, we pull up, right? And get dropped off, and our getaway guy is around the corner. And we have walkie-talkies, so that way if we need to get out of there, we hit him and he comes and we jump in and drive off.
And so you were prepared. You knew there was going to be people in there.
Yeah, we knew there was going to be people, but it wasn't like it was just going to be the workers.
Okay.
So it was just like the skeleton crew of the workers, right? I didn't know how many people, but there was going to be people in there. And so we walk in, and there was this guy, this older guy that was towards the front, right? His name was Patrick Lawrence. And I know all the victims' names because of all the years of having to kind of like, get to that place of where you actually empathize and understand the ripple effect of what the you did, right. And it's important to put a name to somebody's face, sure. So it makes it a little more human. But this guy, Patrick Lawrence, was right there, and I pull the gun out and I tell him, don't move, get to the back. And he looks at me and he grabs the gun, right? So automatically was going wrong. So he grabs the barrel of the gun and I like freeze, not knowing what to do. And my crimee comes up behind him and acts like he has one. He didn't have a gun, but he acted like he did, and he jabs his finger against his side and he goes, "Let it go. Don't be stupid, da-da-da-da-da." So the dude lets it go. So we get him, and there's two like women that are cleaning tables. And so I point the gun at them and I'm telling everybody to go to this desk that's towards the back of the hall, kind of like where you would probably go in and whatever. It's like a administrative desk. And while we get everybody there, we hear the toilet flush in this bathroom. And so my crimey goes, "Go see who that is." And so I go walking up towards the bathroom, and this janitor comes out. And I point the gun at him, and he's like, he can't even register it at first. I remember he stopped and he like looked down at he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Yeah. What the And so then he registered it. And so I go, "Get over there." And so he starts walking over. And when I walk over to where everybody else is at, I look around and my crimey is gone. And I'm like, where the is this dude at? And next thing I know, he comes through this sliding glass door that you can't tell is open with these blinds that are like floor to ceiling. And he's panicked. He goes, "We got to get out of here, man. Somebody just ran out this side door." And so this woman ran out, and she was like, it was like 10 in the morning. So she's like running down the street yelling, right? "Help, help, help." Yeah. And so I tell everybody, "Go into the office." And we turn around and run out and jump into the getaway car. We radio. Mm-hmm. So we jump into the getaway car and we drive off. And oh, no. I'm sorry. Before that happened, while me and my crimey are talking about it, this older woman, Nora Kirkbride, she comes out and she has a small pistol and she pulls it out and she points it at us. And my crimey grabs the gun and he goes, "What are you doing?" And she just lets it go. Wow. And so it's just, to me, is mind-boggling, as now I'm like a parent and I'm all these different things, right? And I just think about how wrong all of that could have happened.
Yeah, someone easily could have got killed.
This is why I say, I don't feel bitter about what happened to me in any type of way. It was such a blessing because it just made me, I just am so thankful for the experience, that I was able to go through after that. But anyways, she lets it go. And then I tell everybody, go in the office. They go in the office. Him and I run, jump out. We get into the getaway car. We drive only a few blocks away to where his house was at. And then I was staying like 3-4 houses up, right? And so when we get there, I'm like upset and like relieved, right? Because, you know, like at least we're away and we got away and all this different, but I'm upset because I had these dreams. I already had this cutlass lined up that I was going to buy, and I was going to go to the swap meet and get a bunch of clothes. I was going to go buy a bunch of weed, and then I was going to get the out of Lancaster. I don't know where I was going. This was I was like at this stage in my life where I was like, I just want to get this and then go somewhere. I don't know where. And it just seemed like I was going to get a lot of money. A few grand seemed like a lot to me at that time. So we get there and I'm like, what the happened? And my grandma's like, man, this lady ran out the side door and like, you know, we going to do, man? We had to get out of there. And so I'm like, whatever, I'm going back home, right?
So where was home?
Home was only 3 houses up from there.
Okay, so you did you go back to live with your dad?
No,
during
so
these
it was
years?
my biological mother's house was a few houses up, right? But I was only there off and on. I would be gone for like months at a time, and then I would pop up, crash for like a week. She didn't care.
Yeah.
Did
your folks know that you were gangbanging? Did they know what was going on?
Yeah. Yeah, my folks knew. My dad was always looking for me, trying to intervene, you know, in some type of way. If I felt like I saw his truck or something like that, I'd hit a couple fences or something and try to get out of there and like, you know, not have him get his hands on me and stuff, you know. You know, they were in the streets looking for me.
Yeah.
Man.
Wow. Okay, so
my poor dad.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to show this episode to my father, who used to get mad when I would break curfew by half an hour.
Yeah.
I'm like, I could have been a white Crip.
Seriously,
dude.
yeah.
All that
yeah,
yelling.
Yeah,
You didn't have to yell.
And he was like super responsible, man. He's such, and still like such a good, he also helped save my life. When I decided to leave the gang, drop out and pursue this unknown, you know, path in life. I didn't know where I was going. I never thought I was going to drop out ever. And I hear all these guys all the time on the internet always talking about they would never do this, they would never drop out, they would never do that. When you start getting up in the double digits and then past the double digits, you think differently. And it's not that there's not guys that never do, right? You got guys that are 40 years mainline. You got guys 30 years in Pelican Bay shoe alone, right? In the shoe. But they look at things differently too, because they see when people leave and stuff. And anyways, my point was that I never thought that was going to happen. And I remember when I did, and I just finally was like, I'm done with this. I'm going to go see what else is there for me.
But you were really entrenched though, psychologically and culturally.
Yeah, it was a really
point.
hard thing for me to do. It was like, it was very difficult. I wanted to live in peace though, very quickly. Right after, I think the entire time I just wanted to live in peace, my entire life.
Yeah.
You know, even as a kid, I was so sick of what my parents were doing and all this and everything. I was just trying to get the fuck away.
Yeah.
But, you know, I just messed it all up. But the thing is like when I was in prison, I was never like a really violent dude, you know? I was just the dude that I didn't put up with no when tried to bring it to me.
Right.
Yeah. And so I never really cared for the violence in that way. And, you know, I was so entrenched that my ego is what really kind of like kept me for a little bit longer than I should.
Yeah.
I wouldn't even say should have and all of that, because I'll get into how that was an actual benefit for me to go through what I went through. Also, when I stepped away and went to the dropout yards where there's no structure. Right.
Yeah, I've heard dropout yards are even actually wilder now.
They are. I got to Calipat was the first dropout yard that I went to, and it was an old yard of all the old regs, AB, BGF, NF, MA. They're still killers. I mean, as soon as I got there, these two dudes, Cub and Casper, man, blasted this dude Gator, man, like stabbed his eye out, like just in the middle of the yard. Yeah. It's just that over there, I wasn't targeted because I had the past of being a white Crip.
Yeah.
Only a few of the ex-skinheads that try to get started and like that in the beginning tried to give me some, but I quickly, you know, bulldozed past that.
I wonder if the dropout yards will now become the main line, and the main line will become the dropout yards. It's already happening.
In the state of California, the dropout yards, there's a higher population than there is. Yeah. You have more S&Y yards than you do general population yards, right? And
so crazy.
It's really probably smart of the system, because the system made it easier for people to drop out. So at first, you couldn't just like go to a dropout yard.
Yeah.
Right? You could just go to them and be like, hey, I want to drop out of a gang. Can you just send me over here? You know,
Yeah.
they're going to be like, what are you talking about? You know, and then you had to go through this debriefing process. The higher you were, the more you had to, you know, you had to give people up and all this type of, yeah. For me, it was a little bit different because being a white Crip, they were trying to always get me to go over to they knew that my life was constantly in jeopardy.
Right.
So administration was always like, you need to go over to these yards, otherwise you're going to get killed over here type of thing. I just used to tell them in committee off, you know.
Yeah.
So
how did the crime, I mean, yeah, how'd you get popped? How did it go down?
So we get to the house. I decide, you know, I'm going to go back up to my place, and I walk out the front door. My other homeboy, that was my sponsor guy, right? All this type of, he was my big homie from the hood. He comes with me, and we're walking as we're walking up the street. We're like talking about it, right? And when we get to my front door, I'm putting the key in to unlock it, and a squad car comes pulling out of the side alley. And when the squad car comes pulling out of the side alley, the officer sees us, notices our description, immediately jumps out, draws down. And I put my hands up, and then my homeboy, through the walkie-talkie, he ran off and got away. And so they zipped me up and cuffed me, put me in the back of the cop car.
Did you guys have ski masks on when you went in there?
No.
You didn't?
No.
This is reckless.
Yeah, because
it's
there was
cowboy.
it was cowboy stuff. And then we figured there's no cameras, like that type of thing.
Right.
We were just going to go in, you know, and strong arm it and get the fuck out. But so coming to find out, it was this Detective Torres, right? Who was a part of the gang task force. And I was already on file. The crew I was a part of was already on file. And they really wanted the guys that I was with. They were under investigation for a lot of different. And so when they get me, they have the witnesses come ID me. The witnesses, of course, just looked at me and they were like, yeah, that's that little right there, you know? And then they take me down to the station. They take me down to the station and they start to grill me, and I'm denying everything, right? I don't know what you guys talking about. I'm just walking up the street with my homeboy. We're coming from the liquor store around the corner, blah, 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 blah. You know, they're like, no, we're not paying attention to that. And so they take me to Challenger, which is the juvenile camp in Lancaster. And it was because it was on a weekend, I had to wait till Monday to then catch the Grey Goose down to Silmar in the valley, in the San Fernando Valley, which is like the main institution for everybody out in that region of Los Angeles County for juvenile hall. And so I remember they take me to Challenger, and you spend like 2 days in the box while you're waiting to go down, like a disciplinary spot, just because you're not yet sentenced to camp, so they can't put you like in a general population. And so anyways, the day that I'm getting ready to transfer, and it was super weird, you know, like I went to school on Friday and attempted the robbery on Saturday.
You were still going to school?
Yeah, I was trying to, you know. Yeah, I tried. I had re-enrolled they had this new thing called it was some runaway law that had been passed where if you were a runaway, you could enroll yourself in school without your parents' permission to try to like incentivize kids to try to get back into school. And so when I had come back out from LA, and like I was already kind of transitioning away from that life, I think. There's a lot of things that I look back at and I see that I really wanted to. I just was still so immersed in, you know, everything that was going on.
Yeah, mentally you were maturing a little bit.
A little bit, yeah. I enrolled myself in school, even though like I got kicked out like 2 months later. I didn't even make it through the first day. The first day I was like, I don't need to be here. I just got up randomly in the middle of the class, literally walked out and never went back. And then the truancy officer, Jolynn Shreves, love her to death. She gets me because I got busted at this college, this community college down the street from the high school. And she comes and gets me. And she's like, dude, the staff had all been advised about me and like things like that because I was a runaway, so it was like special circumstances in a lot of ways. And so she was like, "What's it going to take for you to stay in school?" And I'm like, I don't know. I get to this. She goes, "Well, I noticed you get to this point, and so how about from that point on, you just become my TA? You come over here and you help me." And so I was like, "Cool." And I did that for like a good month or so, and then I got in some fight with some kid over a girl, and then got kicked out and went to this continuation. And that's where I was going when that weekend I committed the crime.
But you're 17 now, and you've never been arrested before, right?
No, I had been arrested. Yeah, I'd been arrested before.
Okay.
But I had never like been through any type of process, like arrested, released, right, to my parents, type of thing.
But with the gang, since you've been a Crip, had you been arrested for anything?
Yeah, I got arrested and for a grand theft auto, and was taken down to Sylmar, but it was a DA reject, and so the district attorney didn't pick it up. And I was just released back out in, back out into Lancaster like a day later or something like that, 2 days later.
Okay, but your fingerprints and everything are in the system now.
My fingerprints are in the system. Yeah, I just have no like convictions in any type of way.
Are you aware of the harshness of like gangbanging criminal penalties at this point?
I had no idea that you can be tried as an adult as a juvenile.
Even with, what year is this? 2002? 2003?
This is 2002 at the time.
Okay.
Yeah.
You didn't hear from the big homies like...
Nah, you don't get... I didn't have big homies like that. There are people that are that way. Like, it's kind of like... Remember I was telling you about Gary Bolin, right? Yeah. And G from Modesto. When he went into prison, he did a really smart thing, right? For his survival anyways as a white Crip. His older homies told him, when you hit reception, they're going to ask you what your race is, right? And you just tell them black. That's it. And they're just going to mark it down. Swear to God, this dude looks just like you, right? Tall, same thing. Now you get to counselor, counselor's going to go, "What race are you?" You're going to go, "I'm black." And they just put it there. And what that does is that makes your paperwork say that you are black. Your bed card is black, right? So what it does is it gives the whites on the yard a way out if they want it. It's not always that they want it, but if they want it, right, what they can do is they can say, "What are we talking about this dude's for? His bed card is black. His paperwork is black. Wow. He says he's black.
I don't have to stab him.
I don't got to do it. He's not, what are you talking about? This dude's paperwork does not say that he's white, Wow. So you have guys that get laced like that sometimes, but I wasn't one of them. I didn't have an older homie that did any of that for me. He didn't tell me that. The only thing my older homie taught me was like, here's the gun, hold this, do that, like it was all in the criminal way. It wasn't like how to protect yourself through the criminal process.
Isn't it funny that California is like known now for its identity politics? Yeah. Like anybody I can identify as a woman, whatever. And even back in the criminal justice system, you're like, I can be whatever I want, dude.
Yeah, I think maybe that's why I didn't like freak out when I got home. When I got out and I was like, oh, we've been dealing with dudes that are, like, we already had, I don't know what to say and what not to say because I don't want to say anything that's going to offend people. No. You know what I mean? But
these animals, no, come on. You say whatever you want.
Yeah, I mean, it just is, I don't know, but I wasn't shocked in coming home because I was already around prison punks. I was already around dudes that identified as women. I was already around white guys that say they're black guys that say they're Mexican, the whole works, Yeah.
But you weren't aware of what was about to come down on you. Certainly. It doesn't sound like that.
No, I didn't understand at all,
How long did it take you before the DA charged you after you got bagged?
Oh, right away. So as soon as I hit Challenger, the district attorney had already filed charges. And it started out as the attempted armed robbery. Right. And so I was looking at 16 months in camp at that time. And the day that I'm getting ready to transfer down to Sylmar, I remember I'm sitting where you get these sack lunches and it's peanut butter and jelly sandwich and probably like a hard-boiled egg or whatever. And I'm getting shackled up and getting shackled to all these camp kids that are all going back down to the juvenile hall for whatever reason. And I remember when I got busted in black Converse with fat blue laces in them, right? And so I'm sitting there, and you know how I look, right? I don't look, and imagine me when I didn't even have any tattoos or anything like that. So I never looked like, kind of like what I was actually doing. And I remember this dude from Inglewood. He's from Inglewood Families, which is like a really, really hardcore rival of the Raymonds, right? So this dude looks at me and he goes, hey, white boy. He's like, you know, what you got those blue laces in your chucks for? And so I look at him and I'm like, I'm from Raymond Crips. And he, like, I remember his face got all screwed, like he couldn't compute what it was. He goes, Raymond? I go, yeah. He goes, fuck Raymond, it's Inglewood Families, right? So I was like, damn, I don't really know what to do with this. I'm like all cuffed up and like, I don't know what the jail is and this and that. I just know that I'm gonna fuck this motherfucker up if I can, right? So they put us on the bus and this dude from Schoolyard leans back at me and he goes, yo, man, why you let him talk to you like that? I go, what am I gonna do? He got me in cuffs. So he's like, all right, homie, I'm just saying. So we get down to Sylmar, boom. And we get off the bus and that dude stays on. He's supposed to be going to Central, which is like for everybody from the inner city part, right? And I'm sitting in this holding tank. They take the cuffs off and there's these wood kind of like benches and stuff while you're waiting to get intaked into the juvenile hall. And next thing you know, here comes this dude, right? He had told him he had to use the restroom, but the whole time he's just trying to come get at me, you know? And so I'm sitting there and I see him and I'm like, oh, this right here. And he comes up and he says, go over, white boy, right? Like that. And it's like, all right, man. I scoot over and he sits down. As soon as he sits down, I jump up and boom, I rack him, drop him off of the thing. And now I'm on him. Boom, 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 boom. They pepper spray us, all types of shit. And that kind of was like the way that I started in juvenile hall, you know? And yeah, so.
Just fading immediately.
Right away. And it was definitely live. When you're from Raymond, you have so many enemies,
right,
man. There's like, you got Crip enemies, you got blood enemies, everybody's an enemy when you're from Raymond. But anyways, though.
How did 16 months? 16 months is what you were facing.
Yeah, so I'm facing 16 months. They send me up the hill in Sylmar. And about a month and a half later, maybe, you know, they're like visiting me. The district attorney comes to visit me. She's like, you need to talk about who you were with and like all these different things. And I'm telling her, I don't know what you're talking about.
Because you have two Codys, right? The guy who did the driver and the homie that had the gun.
Yeah. Well, the homie that I had the gun, but the dude that came in with me. Yeah. Okay. And so, and they were all, you know, like the dude that was with me was like 40, probably like 43, 44 at the time. Wow. And then my older homie, the one that was kind of like initiated me into everything, he was like, I don't know, what was he at the time? 30, early 30s, maybe late 20s.
So they probably had lengthy criminal records by then.
They've been in and out of the pen, YA, all that type of stuff. They were guys like that. And so about a month and a half then is when all of a sudden they tell me to roll my property up. They're sending me to the Y unit in Sylmar. And the Y unit was for everybody that is either is going to or coming from YA, or you're being tried as, you're going through what's called a fitness hearing, which is, are you going to be fit to be tried as a juvenile, or are you going to be found unfit and bound over to adult court? And so that's when they broke the news to me that I was now fighting a fitness hearing, and that it wasn't about any of my court hearings weren't about guilty, not guilty at this point. It was now about whether or not I was going to be tried as an adult or as a juvenile. And I didn't have any idea. And my poor dad, man, didn't even find out I was in juvenile hall until like probably 2 months to me being in there.
Wow.
Yeah.
Why?
Because I didn't give him his information. The juvenile halls don't ever follow up on that type of stuff. You know, I gave him my mom's information, but she was off, marrying some other guy or whatever. You know, she was off doing her thing.
So the DA wants blood now.
So the DA wants blood. And
do you think you would have caught such a harsh sentence if this had happened in the city? Like if this had happened in LA?
This would have never been, in CCB, I would have never been tried like this. Right. Because it's kind of a small crime compared. I think the thing that really motivated it was that it was the guys that I was with, and that each time everything was being amped up to get me to cooperate and scare me in some type of way. I just wasn't doing it. And so it was like, well, then we'll do this to you, And then now they're like backing up what the it is that they're saying that they're going to do in order to be able to kind of like try to get me to crack. And I don't think they expected me not to. I think they expected me to crack. I don't think they expected me not to do that.
Yeah.
And, I mean, I couldn't even comprehend what it meant though, like facing a life sentence. Yeah, I was like, no way. And I was calling people that I knew and all this type of, and my older homie that was on this, he was on the streets, you know? Yeah. So I was calling him and he's like, oh, bro, just, you chill, man. They're not gonna give you life. You never even, he genuinely was like, they're not gonna give you life, bro. You never been to jail. They're gonna send you to juvenile hall or YA or something like that, you know?
I guess we'll get to it. But yeah, this is an example of how the system, despite all its checks and balances and rules, it's made up of individuals, and individuals are flawed. They're vindictive. They, are unhappy a lot of the times, especially prosecutors working in the Los Angeles County judicial system. And so they're like, this punk, like they take it personally.
Oh yeah.
And so, and this is how they ramp up. And this is where the injustice of it comes in, even though it was a real crime and you deserve to do time for it. I would say.
Yeah, absolutely.
Considering the circumstances, you scared a lot of people.
Yeah.
There was a gun involved.
And that I had been doing before too. Just get this dude off the streets, sit him down for a little bit and see if maybe there's like some potential for change to take place.
Right. Because, and I guess let's save that as well. But how does you take it to trial?
Yeah, I took it all the way to trial, took it all the way to the box. I had this the whole experience was all the whole experience was also like how I kind of fell through every crack, and then how I kind of helped myself also fall through all these different cracks. They offered me like, I think the lowest that they got was like 19 years with no life, right? And I would have done probably off of that like 13 years or something like that, like kind of a reasonable sentence in a lot of different ways for the severity of what I was involved in, right? Not necessarily that crime, but at least like what they knew that I was involved with, the people that I was involved with.
Did they know you're a gangbanger by now? They know you're with the Crips?
Yeah, they knew. I went in there and then I hit especially once I got bound over to adult court, I hit the county in a time when the gang violence was at an all-time high. I think in the first 6 months that I was in Men's Central, maybe not even 6 months, might have been 3 months. There were 6 people killed just in my module alone, beaten and bodies drugged to for the day. They shut down the day rooms completely because of the amount of murders that were taking place.
Were they beat? These are like shankings or?
Stab, beat. Some of them not even shanks. Some guys just getting beat to death in a day room. And sheriffs were killing people. You had that whole thing. Lee Baca was still very much doing his thing. The culture of the sheriff's department was very much doing its thing inside there.
Super corrupt.
Yeah, like that's real when you hear about them talking about like you got to face this mural of John Wayne, right? And they would go through and smack dudes nuts with these big old mag lights. I was there when they got the mag lights and the batons taken from them because there was such an amount of abuse that was going on behind it. So
that's when LA County, it got put on the map.
I was in the 2000 floor, which was like one of the most violent floors at that time, 26, 28. My first, I got snatched into a room and beat unconscious by the white boys I didn't even make it to my cell. Wow. I didn't even make it to my cell yet before they snatched me up in this hallway. And drug me into this room. And then next thing I know, I woke up, blood everywhere, and this cop standing over me.
Wow. Why? Because you were a Crip?
Yeah, they asked. This dude comes in and they see this, white boy that's in the tank. And so this guy leans into the bars and he's like, hey, little brother, let me talk to you for a second. So I walk in, he goes, what's up, Wood? And one thing I had always been told, because I had been writing with the adults as a juvenile when I was being tried, was when they call you a Wood, say I'm not a Wood, I'm a Crip, right? And so that's what I said, I go, I'm not a Wood, I'm a Crip. And the dude was like, what the f-? And he goes, what do you mean you're a Crip, man? He goes, from where? I said, I'm Raymond Crip. And he was like, that's what you're rolling with? And I go, yeah. And he goes, all right, cool. And he dipped out. And I remember this dude from 20 Bloods, older guy, was on the phone. And he hung the phone up and I was going to go use it. And he tells me, he goes, hey, little Raymond, he goes, keep your eyes out. I just heard what happened right there. And he goes, and I've noticed over here that they're starting to like gather up. So keep your eyes out, man, because they're going to come for you. And so I was like, all right. And I looked over there and I could see like a white dude from a porter come in from the outside of the module, and they're like all having a little conversation, and they're looking at me, and then they're back on their thing, and I'm like, oh man, this is gonna go down.
It always starts with the porter.
Yeah, it always does.
He's the lookout.
He's the lookout, man. And so next thing that happened was I got called for a visit by my mom, and they give you this pass. And at this time you could roam too. I used to roam all over the county off of one pass. Yeah. It was a different time, but they gave me this pass, and I walk out into the hallway, and they tell everybody face the wall, and it's by this mailbox. And so the officers leave, and they go face the wall, and then they leave, and it's just an empty hallway. At this point, you're just waiting for some other officers to work their way up the escalators. Right. You know, the county's huge. It's got escalators. Yeah. And it's a humongous facility. And
it's a labyrinth of different
floors 2005, and this, and dorms, and medical, and then twin towers, two towers, is across the way, and like all that. So I'm facing the wall, and this porter, this dude, he'd come down from the pen. These were all older dudes, and he slung back, and and he runs up on me, and he like puts his face like right next to mine where I'm facing the wall. I don't see him at first, and he goes, "You looking at?" like that, right? And so I turned around, and I remember I cracked him, bam, right, with everything I had, and he just chewed it like a little kid with a grown man,
Right.
And he just was like, boop. And then he picked me up and put me on his shoulder. And so I was like trying to struggle and elbow him. And his buddy runs out and grabs my legs, so that way I can't kick my feet. And then they start dragging me down the tier. And as they're dragging me down the tier, I remember there was like these three black dudes. And I remember I looked at them and I was like, what the?
Yeah. Right? N-words? Help out. Where are you?
So I was like, I looked at him, I was like, really, you guys aren't going to do anything? And I didn't say anything. I just was silent, And so they dragged me down to 2900, and they pull the door open. And I remember I grabbed onto the door handle. And when I grabbed onto the door handle, the dude of my legs lets go, and he comes over and he starts like punching my arms hard, boom, 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 until I just can't hold the door handle anymore. And I let go of it. And I remember this had to have been a wild scene for everybody to see, because in 2900 at that time, everybody was on the tier. They used to rack all the cells and let everybody be out. Right. In this like kind of day room type thing. And so all of a sudden they see this door open up with these two, Woods with this little dude, and they're, beating on him. And then they drag me into this room. And I just remember going unconscious. And then I wake up to an officer with his flashlight. And it had probably only been like 30 seconds, right, in reality. And I like bleary-eyed look up, and I just registered the officer, and the officer looks over at the two dudes. The two dudes are now like this, right? They're just like, whoa, whoa, whoa. And the officer goes, "What the f you guys doing, man? That's another white dude." That's what the officer says. Wow. And I remember my first thought was like, damn, I'm man, because like this dude thinks I'm like, should be stalled out because I'm, another white guy, not that I'm a Crip. And the officer looks at me and he goes, "Are you okay? Are you okay?" And I went, "Yeah, I'm okay." And he goes, "You sure?" And I go, "Yeah." And he goes, "What happened to your face?" Because my face is bloody.
Yeah.
Right? And I told him I had slipped and hit the mailbox. And he saw everything, I'm sure, drug in, and probably some dudes, whoever was, tell him what was going on. Yeah. But he goes, "Is that what you want to go with?" And I go, "Yeah." And he goes, "Where are you going?" And I pulled out my old crinkled up pass, and I go, "I'm going to see my mom. I'm going for a visit." And he goes, "You still want to go?" And I go, "Yeah." And he goes, "All right, go ahead then." Like that.
Well, you kept a G the whole time, at least. You kept it solid.
I did. And this is one thing about it is that it's such a benefit to be able to leave the situation, to leave gangs, to drop out. And there's all these people that talk about it, whatever, right? Did you stay solid? Because eventually if you drop out, you're not, But I really don't give a f, because one thing is my life became exponentially better from the moment that I left gangs, right? And the other thing is that I was able to walk over to those yards and see the influx of young guys coming in now that were going right to that, because the institutions were trying to break up the power of the gangs. And so they're like wanting people to go S and Y. They're creating these new titles, right? You know, of like programming yards and non-programming yards and all this type of stuff. And the language is there's a reason why they have this type of language, you know? But I was able to go over there and fully in my heart be like, I am moving on from this, because I really went out onto those yards.
Yeah.
I never one time rolled it up off of a yard. When I left from the back, right? I was on my way up to Pelican Bay. Wow. And a homie from San Diego who had been put in my cell because he was beating up on his homie from West Covina neighborhood. And the fellas got at me and were like, yo, can you mind taking so-and-so? And I was like, yeah, just throw him in here with me. It's all good. So he comes in with me, becomes one of my best friends, right? This Crip from San Diego 40s. And he was the one really that was like, what the are you doing? You got life in prison, dude. Like, you need to think about that. A lot of these dudes, they're talking about politics and this and that, but it doesn't affect them the same way. You know, like, you want to go through this for the rest of your life? Why? Nobody gives a about you personally, you know? And I remember the day before I was going to transfer, this counselor from Kern Valley, where I was at the time, because I'd went and opened it up and we were all shoe kickouts. I was coming out of Tehachapi Shoe and it was Corcoran and Pelican Bay, and we were going to open up this institution that Arnie had built, because this is when Arnold Schwarzenegger was governor.
Wow.
Yeah, and he had built this place, and it was called a mega prison, right? Mega institution. I forget what he called it. It was Kern Valley, right?
Kern Valley is really bad, I think, even to this day.
Yeah, it's a hardcore institution. Yeah. Even those S&Ys are all lots of murders. It's a highly political power struggle institution.
But that's where you ended up dropping out?
Yeah, I did. Yeah. Okay. So what happened was I was on my way to transfer, and the counselor, CC2 White, she calls me into her office one last time before I was getting on the bus, and she pleads with me, and she says, if you tell me right now, she's like, you're going up to Pelican Bay, you've been all these places, you're lucky that you're not dead right now already. Because at this point, too, I'd already been stopped. This incident right here was a full-blown race riot where I got sliced from here all the way to here, right? And so she was like, you're just lucky to be alive, and they're going to eventually kill you. If you tell me right now that you want to change your life and that you want to stop this, right, I will send you over to a dropout yard, and you'll be out of the hole within 30 days, and your life will be drastically different. And I looked at her and I said, let's do it. Off of a whim. I had no idea that I was going to or anything. I just said, let's do it. And she went, are you serious? And I go, yeah, let's do it. And that, my dad said that was the first adult decision I ever made. That's what he said.
It takes a courageous person within such an awful system like the prison system in America and California, like that your counselor, to do something like that. But let's put a pin in that, though. So you're in this mini penitentiary, which is the LA County Jail.
Yep.
I mean, it's like a pen. You let people hang out on the tier. What's the difference between that and prison?
Yeah.
And all these guys are innocent, by the way. That's what's wild. Yeah, none of you have been convicted of a crime yet.
Yeah,
it's unconstitutional.
Yeah.
But, you know, a lot of things are.
Yeah.
So you're lucky you didn't get stabbed. I mean, because when a guy comes up and grabs your legs and your arms in the pen, usually a third guy's coming up, getting ready to stick you.
Yeah, I got stabbed later. You know, I think that I didn't get stabbed until I got to prison.
Right.
In the county, I didn't get stabbed at all. But I got into, it was always something. But I didn't have to worry about surviving the white boys in the county. Right?
Why?
Like, even from that because when that situation happened, I went down, I visited my mom.
Yeah.
I went back down. After that, when he says, you sure you want to still go? And I said, yeah. I walked out into the hallway. Those two dudes were right behind me. And when I walked out into the hallway, I spun around and I put my hands up and I was ready to go round two. And the first guy that had run up on me and grabbed me goes, no, I'm sorry. This white dude comes out of the hole, because the hole was across the hallway, and he comes out and he starts bulldozing right towards me. And the dude that had grabbed me grabs him and stops him, and he goes, no, he's good. Wow. He's okay. Yeah. He's a good. He goes, he could have got us all cracked.
Yeah.
leave them alone.
Yeah. So you had your stripes with the whites, like you would prove that you
just
weren't
from that situation with those guys.
Right.
But when I went to Wayside, I had to do it again. And when I went to here, but fast forward 3 months and I'm,
Brand
carrying
new.
a green bag with all my property. I'd been catching phase with enemies. So now I didn't really wait for it in that way. I would go into a dorm and I would immediately be like, okay, look, if I'd ask all 4 white guys that are in that dorm, right? Because they're so outnumbered, man.
Yeah.
But I would ask these 4 white guys, any got an issue, let's get this out of the way right now. And some of them would be like, let's do this. And we would handle it, Yeah.
And so on one hand, you have your enemies from the streets, from the black
way
gangs.
More. That was in the county.
But then you also have the whites that don't like that you're a Crip.
Yeah. The county was, I remember when we got jumped by the East Coast over our homeboy Bar Dog, rest in peace. Bar Dog had been up on the 4,000 floor. He got into it with this dude from East Coast, which is our allies, right? The Raymonds anyways. He had got into it with this guy over being drunk on the tier, and Bar Dog was like the one running that tier. And so he got the cell door racked, and another Crip ran in there and beat on the dude from East Coast, basically as like a discipline, right? Mm-hmm. And Bardog had called that shot. So fast forward, Bardog goes to the hole. He hears I'm on the 2000 floor. At that time, I was the only Raymond. Everybody else had been transferring to the pin. And I was down there holding it down, right? As the only Raymond in 2628. And when he heard that I was down there and he got out of the hole, Bardog had so much pull in this county jail. He had been in the county for almost 10 years fighting the death penalty. And so he had like major pull in this place. So he gets transferred to where I'm at, into the cell that I'm at, because it's like 6-man cells and all of that. And so he transfers into the cell and he's like, yo, we're meeting for the first time, but he had heard about me and all this stuff. And so, I'm just happy to have an older homie with me right here and all this different things. And then my crimey on this case comes in on another case. And he hits the tier and he's some porters come walking up to the cell with me and Bardog, and they're like, yo, my name was Y from Raymond, right? And so they're like, yo, is a young Y? I'm like, yeah. And he's like, your brother so-and-so is out here. And so I'm like, my brother? And I was thinking of my real brothers, right? My 2 real ones. And I'm like, oh my God, I got to take care of these guys, right? What are we going to do?
Holy
this place is a jungle down here. So anyways, they're like, yeah, so-and-so from Raymond. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. So I get him pulled in the cell. Now it's the 3 of us. And we get moved over to like whatever it was, Able Row or whatever, right?
What is he in for? Your crimey?
He was in on domestic violence now.
Okay.
Yeah, he was always in and out for domestic violence like that, right? So he's in there on a domestic violence, which he got OR'd and released, right? Which there's a whole thing with my case in general that it just seems sus all the way around. But anyways, we're in there and we all cell up, and one day when we're in there hanging out, this dude from East Coast pops up on the cell and he goes, yo, man, Bardog? And he goes, yeah. He goes, you got to come out to the day room and get DP'd, right? Because of that shit that we heard about on the 4,000 floor. What happened is in the 2000, the East Coast had made a move on these dudes from 60s and took the power, right, of the 2000 floor in the 2628. It was all being run by these dudes from 6-0 and all this type. But they got moved on in this crazy little, skirmish, and the East Coast had come out on top, and now they were the ones who were all like the porters. They were the ones who were running the dope. They were the ones who were like getting bed moves done. So they had control of the module. And now Bardog had been placed into an East Coast module after having had that happen. So they come up and they tell him, you got to come out and get DP'd.
And for those of us that are thinking double penetration, what does DP actually mean in prison?
Discipline.
Right.
Yeah. The double penetration is
it's something else.
Yeah, that's also not as common as you think inside prison.
I've had to tell so many people that on podcasts. I'm like,
it's not like
if you want to, you can find somebody consensually that will do it.
Yeah, and there's dudes that do and all of that, and there are guys that do things like that, but it's not like this thing of like you just go in and there's just a bunch of.
No. What, I think that the percentage of gay sex in prison, would you say it's like 95% consensual? I mean,
yeah, in a way. I mean, a lot of the gay dudes live in fear, though. You know, like the out gay guys, because they get like. There's a lot of dudes that do that on the down low. There was this guy at Calipat. His name was Pumpkin, right? And he had been in the pen for like 30 years. He was an old reg. All the old guys all respected this dude. You know, he was just an old prison punk. And he got transferred up to Kern Valley. And got transferred up to a medical facility, laid over in Kern Valley, and this dude killed him in the cell. And I think what ended up happening, and everybody was like talking about it and stuff, but what we really think, meaning the guys that like have just known all of this type is Pumpkin's not gonna go into a cell with a that Pumpkin is 30-year vet of being a homosexual in prison.
Right.
Like that guy instincts are pretty good.
Of course.
And what happens a lot is these guys fool around with these dudes in the cell, don't want it to get out, and then do something like that. Right. So consensual, I don't know. You know, it's like all of that.
Damn, that's wild.
I don't know what consensual really means sometimes inside of prison.
Well, I meant like straight men that are never coming home, that maybe even are married or have families, but
totally.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. And on the SNY side, really, because you don't have any openly gay guys on the main line. The main line they're not allowed onto. They stopped that back in like the 90s.
I heard that in these really, really crazy days of the LA County Jail, they put the homosexuals in pink.
No, they were
Is that not true?
Not when I was down there. When I was down there, you had guys that were if they weren't in blue. So you had orange for high power. You had the clown suit, which was like blue and white checkered for the gang unit up on the 3000 floor, specifically for validated gang members like NLR. Like, you know, you're not just gonna be a CRIP in there, because CRIP isn't necessarily like a prison validated. You would have to be like a Blue Note or a CCO or like a UBN if you're a blood type of thing. But it's they had these checkered ones, right, where it was like white and blue, and then a white and blue pant leg or something. And then you had Twin Towers, which was yellow and blue. But at Twin Towers, you also had a certain way that it was like a yellow top and a blue bottom was the gays or something. I forget, but it fit into like the yellow and blue thing.
And what are the institutions? What is their thinking behind doing that?
So that way, as far as what color coordinating, like the uniforms and stuff like that,
yeah,
or you just
for
mean
gang members and for
to try to isolate, segregate, make it easy to identify. I'm just, you know,
because that seems like a wild, like Nazi thing to do. Like, hey, we're gonna put these in yellow and blue. You know what I mean? Like that seems like they don't
go like in the general population in yellow and blue. So it's not, they go to specifically a whole gay dorm unit.
I see.
They're not like, you don't have, they're completely separate and segregated from the population.
So that's just an easy way for the guards to be like, okay, you go over there, you go over there.
Yeah.
It seems that, I mean, it seems wildly antiquated, just politically in the politically correct era. That's wild to think about.
Yeah.
That gay people are that much of a target.
Oh yeah.
That they have to be isolated and kind of ostracized by the facility.
Yeah, but it's also too like they start a lot of man. You know, they start and dudes get jealous over them, and they like a lot of the drama. Like they have a whole thing. You know, I remember when I got to Calipat after that whole thing with Cub and Casper. You had a full-blown melee between the gays and their boyfriends.
Like a riot.
Yeah, but it's a riot is on a bigger scale. Right. A melee is like 6 people, like 6-on-6 type of thing, you know?
And a lot of them have brolic. A lot of these dudes are homosexuals, but they're giant inmates, bro.
Yeah. You have a lot of dudes that they're just because a person is gay, you know, it doesn't mean that they don't have strength, or that they're not dangerous. Right. They're not like soft just because they're gay.
Yeah.
You know?
No, it's a fact.
These guys are in the pen. And
that's a fact.
They're going through.
Okay. I'm sorry. So you pulled out to get disciplined. Yep. By the way, when you hear that as a gang member, you're like, you got to get DP'd. Are you just like, do you accept it? Like, are you indoctrinated to be like, okay, this is my duty? Or are you like, I'm about to get beat up?
No, you're indoctrinated to accept it, right? But here was the difference in the way that we handled that situation and in the way that I handled that situation and kind of like brought me some stripes and respect was they weren't talking about DP and me and the other homeboy. They were just talking about DP and Bardog.
I see.
And so the way that we are indoctrinated as a Raymond is like, well, nobody DP's a Raymond but a Raymond.
Right.
You're like, you're not going to be from another neighborhood talking about your DP in one of the homes. You can tell us about it.
Right.
And then if we feel like that's that, then we will handle our own business.
Right.
You know, and so that's exactly what I said. I spoke up to the dudes and I was like, hold up. Last time I thought he was from Raymond. Like, tell us about what the going on. And if he's in the wrong, then we'll DP him in the cell. You know, you don't have to, and they told me basically, up, you know, he's like, especially like I was a little kid, I was like 18.
Yeah.
And so they were like, well, this is not like a discussion or a negotiation in this way. Bardog's going to get up. We're going to take him out here. And so we were like, well, damn, man, how about, this was my idea, how about we all go out to the day room, me, homeboy, and Bardog. And what we do is we line it up with the East Coast car, meaning all three of us will get out with every East Coast in this. We'll do one-on-ones, right? All that type of shit, and we'll get it all out of the way. And they were like, this is not, Bardog is coming out to this day room, and Bardog is going to be the one that's getting DP. And if you can't accept that, then we're going to run in this cell and we're going to handle all you dudes. And that's what they said. And so we told them, well, come on in here then. And they did. And they did.
Wow.
Yeah, they started lining up on the cell. And the only thing that we agreed to was no knives because, you know, the East Coast and the Raymonds are so tight. So it was like, this is happening. These dudes just lined up. Boom, 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 boom. You had, I don't know, 6, 7 dudes right there in front of the cell. And
so your pod's just getting invaded.
Yeah. So the other dudes that are in the cell, right? Like you had this dude from, he was from Village Town, Piru, loved this to death. He was my, you know, ace through the rest of the county. You had a dude that was from like some San Fernando gang, you know, E-Dub or something like that. And so what happened was those dudes got up on the top bunks out of the way. You know, we told them, look, we need to clear this space out. Let's clear it out. And so that way we can handle our thing. And me and Bardog and the other homeboy, we backed up to the back of the cell. And, you know, I had long ass hair at the time. I just braided, put it in a ponytail. And then, and we wrapped our hands up and then we waited for that cell door to rack and it racked and those dudes came in there and we rocked that
Holy
through that entire thing.
And the guards let it go till you guys were just exhausted.
We're done, you know, because they're like, this is their politics right here. This is their that they're handling.
That is real gangbanging.
And we rock it. You know what happened with the homeboy? It was my whole sponsor, an older homie, and all this type of shit. And this was one of the most pivotal moments for me on what started to break me away from the gang and all that type of thing is he was hiding under the bunk. When it was done, this dude comes rolling out from underneath the bunk and Bardog and I are all lumped up and we handled our business. And we looked at him, we were like, what the fuck, man? And he was like, oh man, I got kicked. And then he like said a bunch of shit. And we were like, you know, we were so just jazzed over the fact that we were going to like, that we had survived this and that we showed up, right? Like we were proud of ourselves as dudes from Raymond, right? We were yelling it all on the tier in defiance, you know, we were right, man, all on the tier. And Bardog, at that time, he used to record right over the phone with Dub C and all this type of stuff. Really big in the music. And so he was like going to get out and hopefully he was going to take off with his and this and that and blah, blah, blah. So he used to download tracks, right? And call Dub C. And Dub C's neighborhood was very close to ours from 111. And the Raymonds are like they're like almost one hood almost. You know, they're so tight, that whole rolling hundreds. So he's like beating on the bunk and rapping and shit, and we're just being just like, you know, belligerent, right? With our, and obnoxious with our celebration over the fact that you don't run us, man. And we're still here. Come back in type of mentality. And so we're like doing that. And the next morning, Peanut, who's the homeboy, paroles, or he gets OR'd, meaning his own recognizance. So he gets released on that domestic violence that morning. He went to court.
And this is your co-D, by the way.
This was he was just on another thing.
And he was the one, and he was hiding under a bunk.
Hiding under a bunk. I just remember at that time. But you know what was weird was like almost in some ways by that point there, I had outranked him in the gang now.
Right.
A lot of dudes that were from Raymond had their separate love for me. They weren't, it was no longer like, this is so-and-so's little homeboy. And like, if he's good, if so is good. I had my own thing going now. And so
you must have lost respect for him.
I just, you can't get that back.
Yeah.
You know, not after everything I had been going through and all the different stuff and riding the case and all these different things and down here doing my stuff. And I'm white, you know, I'm like, I was like, there wasn't any coming back from that for me in my eyes. You know, he was forever just soft to me. And so the next day he gets OR'd, and then Bardog gets transferred back up to the 4,000 floor. And now I'm the only Raymond again. And while I'm there, man, I had to deal with all that on my own after that. The only thing that saved me was that there was this dude from 6 Deuce East Coast that was the one that like ran all them dudes, right? And he had a lot of love for me. And he was the one that was like, you got to give Y a fair one. Like if you little young dudes, because these little young dudes would always be plotting, right? They'd gather up and then they'd come over there and they'd say little slick shit to me in the cell and like all that type of stuff. And so he was like, you guys never gonna pack him out. You got to always give him a fair one. And so for a while there, man, they used to pull me out, right? And they'd have some dude, you know, from wherever, so-and-so from Denver. They would come into the cell, so-and-so from Lanes is here, man. He says he wants to get out. I'm like, man, all right, rack the cell. Boom, they rack the cell, go into the day room, either get beat up or beat somebody up, go back to the cell, right? They'd show back up again. Yo, so-and-so from Inglewood Families is here. He says he wants to get out. Them don't even know I'm there. They're just playing these games to get me socked on or like, you know, see how I'm going to deal with it. And until finally, and they hated it because Bardog was up on the 4,000 floor and he was catching all these dudes from East Coast in the holding tanks and he was beating them up one-on-one. So that's why they continue to do that, to the point where I had to send a kite up to Bardog and tell him like, yo, all these dudes from East Coast out, you're getting me up.
Right.
But anyways.
So you're constantly having to just prove yourself and deal with beefs.
It's just everybody. It's just the gang life.
Yeah.
You know, it's the gang life of that.
How long are you fighting your case for?
What did I fight? I fought it until I was 19, so about 2 years, I think. And then I got sent up.
So 2 years you're doing
It was like a year and a half in the county.
Yeah.
I was like 6 months in the halls, year and a half in the county, and then rest of the time in the pen.
And your lawyer, how was your lawyer? Was it a public defender?
At first I had a public defender. And then when I went to trial, I had a paid attorney, right? And my dad was trying to help me out and stuff. You know, he was just trying to save me, man.
Yeah.
The only reason why I had the whole thing in the beginning was because I was like refusing his help, and I wasn't like, you know, I was like, I'm not gonna cry now that I'm in this situation, and like I was going through that. Where my dad was coming from the perspective of just like, dude, you're all that. We can talk about that another time. Like, let's just get you help. And so I finally was like, all right, cool. And then I went to trial with a paid attorney.
Okay. And then the last offer you had before trial was
19 years, 2 strikes. I figured that I was going to get struck out. I was like, I'm not going to make it out of here. Look at my life. I'm like it every day.
Right. You may have caught another stripe with easily in prison.
I was going down to, I was going to visiting strap, you know, like I wasn't going to get caught like that in a cell, like, you know, in the way that it happened to me in the beginning.
What kind of shanks do they have in LA County?
It's just all different kinds that you can find
rudimentary,
and make and all
right?
that. Yeah. Like ours was funny that this particular one that I had, I was underneath the bunk cleaning one day and I like scraped my back on this hangnail of metal. Right. And I was like, oh, what the f-? And so I like flipped over under the bunk and I was looking at it and I was kind of like messing with it. And I was like, that thing looks like kind of like it can come off. And so I braided a rope and, you know, hooked it onto the thing. And then we start pulling on this thing, me and the other fellas in the cell, and an entire strip of flat came off the entire bunk.
Wow.
And so we just broke that whole thing down.
Everybody's strapped now.
Yeah, the whole cell was.
Yeah,
you know? And so when I was going to visiting, I would keep it in, and you have to go through a metal detector, but a lot of times they would have it off, you know?
Yeah.
And so I was like, I'm going to get struck out. This is how I felt at the time. I didn't know about things. Like you don't hear also too, when you're active and in the county and even active in the pen at that time, SNY and like dropping out and shit was like, you had like 2 SNY yards in the entire state.
Right.
And I was, wasn't even thinking about.
Yeah, there was very little hope for people. If you have over 15 years in high level California yards, like your odds of getting out are very slim. You're either going to OD, or you're going to kill somebody and get a life sentence, or you might get killed yourself. So you know.
And they didn't have at that time, and a lot of things changed. You know, in the mid 2000s, I remember when Jerry Brown came back in as a governor, and he re-implemented a lot of the budget to the CDCR. And so what happened was whereas Arnold had shut down like vocational trades, education, all of these different things, Jerry Brown came back and then was like, and society at that time also was like more receptive to rehabilitation. Yeah. And that's when they changed it from CDC to CDCR. Right. Right. And so all these vocational things all started to pop back up. And eventually I got into all of that. Like I went on to college and all these, I went in with like an 8th grade education, but I ended up, going on to GED and then college and all types of stuff in there. But for the first probably, 12 years, those things didn't really exist. You know, I wasn't thinking about college or didn't have flag football. No. The way that you do now. Like fast forward to where I paroled from a level 2. I was 13 years on a level 4, overread down to level 3. They did a whole point, reshift thing, and then just continued to drop from there. And then paroled from a level 2. And level 2 was like, dudes, it was like that. It was like flag football. Yeah. And, we're all like making food. And I was an institutional barber. I used to go all around the yard cutting hair. And it was just like I was in education. I was a full-time student. I was in all the facilitating groups. It took a while though for the pendulum to swing. Yeah. Especially in California. It's swinging back too. That's the thing that's sad, is that it swings back and forth. And it's crazy because I get both sides, right? Like I see the waste on the inside of the money that goes into CDCR and myself, and like, why isn't that going to like public schools, or why isn't that going to this or that? Yeah. Or why isn't it being a little bit more closely monitored so that way it's actually being allotted and implemented properly? Well, and the whole society the pendulum is swinging back that way. Yeah. Yeah. And I don't know if there's ever a way that humans can figure out how to like stop the pendulum from swinging when it's in the middle. Yeah. Yeah, I don't think so. I think humanity is like, very scared. It's very scared, discontent, there's like, they don't really, reach a place where they're going to just kind of like let that be. I think it's going to improve drastically in the next couple of centuries. Yeah. Because it's just technology. We're going to come into this time of abundance. Life is going to be so easy. The prices of things are going to be so cheap. I think that's what will save us. Not ourselves though. It's hard to say. I mean, with like, let's say for example, right now, you have like pharmaceutical abuse at an all-time high, drug abuse at an all-time high, homelessness at an all-time high. We see the advancements of technology, and then we see the separation in the socioeconomic status, right? And kind of like in class and things like that. There's a lot of reasons to that, but won't even try to attempt to tackle a solution, because, how do you deal with something that's so big and so large that I don't even, understand it fully. But it's hard to say, man, but I also feel like it's weird on a individual level. I have a belief that what people truly want is peace and harmony. People just want to just feel at peace. Yes. And they seek safety, and they want to feel, they want to feel kind of like supported in a certain way, right? But I feel like it's truly peace that people search for. And it's the traumas that we experience that end up warping that in some type of way. Unfortunately, people are also vengeful when it comes to being victims of crime. Yeah. That's not the way to be. It won't make you feel better in the long term. Forgiveness will. It goes back to the ancients, and they teach that. Yeah. So that being said, when you go to trial and you blow trial, you lose. Yep. Were there victim statements
afterwards when it came to sentencing?
No, I mean, they felt bad that I got right.
But that was going to be my point. Is like, I bet if you asked all those people that got robbed, like, does this 18-year-old kid,
they went back
well-spoken, does he deserve a life sentence?
Yeah.
And they'd be like, absolutely, that's like tyranny. Absolutely not.
Yeah, they felt really bad. The jury felt really bad. There was this whole thing with the jury where this woman had dropped a note saying she was being bullied and coerced into the guilty verdict. I had this guy that was on there, became the foreman of the jury. He was like a 20-year, vet at Lancaster State Prison, right? Like he was heavy in law enforcement. He was telling him I was only going to probably get like 16 months in prison, like it might be good for me, they just, nobody expected what the judge gave me. And I was essentially, I was sentenced to about, I think in total it was like 80 to life, and all bow-legged and consecutive. So there was 5 people in the building. I got convicted of kidnap for robbery for 2 of them, which carries an automatic 7 to life in the state of California, plus a 10-year gun enhancement. So that was a 17 to life for each one of just those 2 people ran consecutively. I had to do 1 17 to life before I would start on the next. And then the others, it was all lesser crimes of like false imprisonment, attempted armed robbery, and then all of the enhancements with guns. I didn't get any gang enhancements. Okay. But they gave me the gun enhancements, which was a 10-year on everything. And so I had 2 consecutive 17 to life sentences plus like another 60 something years.
Yeah, make your head spin. You don't even get it at that point.
No, I didn't even get it.
The running them consecutive is very rare.
Yeah, it was super rare. The whole thing that happened to me was very rare. When I went into the prison system, I landed on, I went right to the level 4, right to a 180. And I was on the yard with like 90% lifers, right? And I was a lifer as well. But the difference was that like nobody was there for like what I did. What I did, all the guys were on the lower levels. Yeah. Up there, it was all murder, attempted murder, right? Like things like that. And so it really was what sparked years and years of activism from this attorney, Joe Pertel, who I love very much, right? And was a huge part of me coming home. And then Loyola Marymount, the JIFS, Juvenile Fair and Innocent Sentencing Project. It's like a whole thing. They represented me pro bono and fought for me. Wow. My case was talked about throughout attorneys throughout the entire country. And I was brought up with guys like Graham versus State of Florida, who for the Supreme Court, the United States Supreme Court, ruled that you can't give a juvenile life without a murder, because Florida had done this to this kid. Wow. And so that was the first glimpse of hope. I see. Right, that was going to happen. Okay. And then what ended up happening was the ARC loved this whole organization, right? Anti-Recidivism Coalition. What they did was they got a bill passed in the state of California called SB 260, which was if you're a juvenile and you've been sentenced to life, you fall into a bracket of 20 or 25 years, right? Depending on your sentence, you automatically go to a parole board. So let's say you're like me, you have 80 to life. At 20 years, I would have gone to a parole board. I see. Yeah, which I didn't go to a parole board. I got resentenced by a judge and sent home.
Okay. Yeah. But, obviously at this time, your life's over as far as you know it.
Yeah, as far as it was too hard for me to comprehend. I also was just I didn't really get hit with that reality until I started to get up into the double digits. When I hit around 10 years is when I started to look around me and kind of internalize the situation that I was in and the reality that I just might be here for the rest of my life. Before that, a lot of it had to do, when I was active, it was all about
the moment.
When I land on a yard, who the is going to ride with me? What do I need to do? How am I going to survive this? And put that on repeat. And then when I dropped out, I wasn't really focused on going home. I was just focused on like, how am I going to create a life inside of here of stability? I just wanted to feel stable. I wanted to do what everybody else was doing, which is like, just go to your job, come home, watch Jack Bauer and 24, you know, like I wasn't, and just read and like feel like I wasn't targeted. Yeah. So that was for the next few years.
I see. And but the first 10, you think about the first 10 of your stretch is gangbanging?
No. It was, I don't know, maybe 5 years.
Okay. So let's talk about that. And then let's get to your, like the psychological transformation. What makes the story so remarkable is like, you know, your ability to like, overcome this mentally long before you even know you're coming home. The day you were sentenced, were your parents at the sentencing?
Yeah.
Oh I would have fainted. I mean,
well, my dad you know, when you go to trial, you get trial clothes if you have them, right? If you have somebody that can get them for you. And it was so sad because I remember I had some slacks, a button up, and a tie, and I didn't even know how to tie a tie. The bailiff used to put the tie around my neck and tie my tie for me before going in, you know? And so my dad took those clothes, and the day that I got sentenced, I mean, my whole family just collapsed into each other. You know, I have 2 brothers, 1 sister. I'm close to everybody, right? It was so traumatic for my family. And he took those clothes and he hung them up in his closet and he said, I'm never taking them down until Tyler comes home.
Wow. Yeah. So he believed.
He didn't. No, I wasn't. It just was, we didn't know. I mean, it was, of course, in the beginning, you know, we have this hope because you have appeals, and then you have time, and then you have like the
delusion
shock of like, you know, this could happen. And he wrote a book, it got published, you know, to try to bring awareness, called Destructive Justice, and all these different things. You know, it took him 10 years to write this book. But so they were there for my sentencing, and it was just one of the most horrible things. Yeah,
it's true tyranny. That's true. It really, it's disturbing. It's disturbing. I hope people, you know, when people really like, they cheer the rallying cry of Donald Trump when he says, you know, we're going to execute drug dealers. Of course, then he goes and pardons Ross Ulbricht. Idiots. This guy doesn't mean anything he says. Right. But, you know, you should really think about that. Yeah. It's the reason. Go read about slavery. Yeah. The slave owners didn't work free. Yeah. Like they were, you know, they would die because it's a soul. Being an oppressor is as destructive to the spirit and ultimately the body as the, you know, the person being enslaved. But anyway, so
I don't know if it's at the same level, but I'll tell you this is that one thing I learned is, and I think the other thing too is that you're right though, because whenever you treat somebody with cruelty, then you lose a piece of yourself. You lose a piece of your humanity. And I saw that with a lot of guys. And one of the things for myself that I really, when I was looking into the future, and I got around all the real gangsters, like I was around the dudes that were calling the shots. I was a little nobody. Mm-hmm. I was never of that. But because of my situation, it got those guys involved. And because I was constantly in the hole, I got around them. And I realized that they suppressed their empathy over and over and over and over to the place of where it becomes so small. But you can reverse that, right? If you practice empathy, if you practice stepping outside of yourself and doing something that's kind for somebody in some type of way, then it grows. And when it grows is when you realize how much you actually have given away of yourself through acts of cruelty. Sure. You know, so.
Yeah, those big shot callers are themselves oppressors from the guys that they use to commit violence all over the state of California. Totally. So, you know, those guys aren't innocent either. And I'm not saying that there shouldn't be prisons. Like those dudes probably deserve to be inside.
Just a small percentage of real psychos.
Yeah, for sure.
There's dudes that are just full-blown psychos. For sure. But they're such a small percentage of the actual population.
I agree.
You know?
I agree. Okay, so where do they shoot you off first? Here's this whole long gulag archipelago you're about to embark on.
Yeah. So Tehachapi I started off at. And
you go level 4 right away.
Right away, I mean, it kicked off as soon as I hit reception.
Yeah.
You know, I was in Tehachapi reception, and I was walking back from the chow hall one morning, and I noticed these two dudes that were skinheads. They hadn't moved on me yet, but I saw as in the months that I was there, they were starting to collect. There was a lot of dudes that were getting on that yard. And when they started to land on that yard, you know, as they get their numbers up, they're going to come for me.
Yeah.
So,
and you're black.
Yeah, I'm rolling black.
You're rolling black. Who are the sets? Can you describe on the streets? It's the Crips, it's the Rolling 60s, it's the 120s. But in the pen, what are the in the California state system? What are the strongest like Crip cars?
Well, the Crip cars are like broken up into regions, right? So you have the San Diego car, you have the Riverside car, and they all have valid hitters. You know, they're all in their own way established. And then you have certain gangs, I guess, inside of that for the dudes from LA that are Crips. It's definitely the Raymonds. It's definitely the East Coast. It's definitely like Hoovers. It's definitely Grapes, right? You know, those guys are all been around forever and they're super strong, you know, in what they do. And then you have paperwork guys. You know, you have CCO, Blue Notes, things like that, which is guys from all different Crip organizations that come together and that now form like an alliance and inside of prison, and they label themselves something else.
So then who were you rolling with at Tehachapi?
I mean, well, the Raymonds are all automatically underneath paperwork because they were the founders of that, right? So the East Coast and the Raymonds really founded that, but it's just more along the lines of like, you're just a Crip on the yard, you know, and there's just a bunch of black dudes that are from all different parts of the region, and you're just another dude that's there.
Right.
And
so if you're white, but you're rolling black with the Crips on the yard of level 4, highest prison politics.
Oh yeah.
If these skinheads are plotting on you, they're coming at a black guy. Like that could cause a race riot. It goes.
Well, it does cause a race riot. For me, it always caused a race riot.
Okay.
The only place it didn't was in the reception. The two skinheads moved on me, and I had a cellie at that time. His name was No Name from Swans, right? And he was a white blood, but he was an older dude. Yeah, he was an older guy. Like he looks like he had a long red ponytail, big ass red mustache, right? Like. Irish looking, you know, dude. And he was half Mexican, half white, right? And that's how he was in South Central, really. They were like an older family. Because, you know, South Central and Compton and all that was white at one point.
Right.
And then when you had a huge influx of the black population from the South coming into California, right? And then you had white flight. A lot of them were like, man, they got the fuck out of there. And you learn about all that in college, you know, about what is happening. But anyways, his family is one of the ones that stayed. And so he grew up in the middle of South Central, in the Swans neighborhood, all of that. And he was my cellie at the time. And these dudes move on me, man. And I remember I'm getting busy with one of them, and this dude comes up and he grabs me and he slings me out of the way, and he takes his cup and he goes, wham, and he hits the dude that I was fighting with, right? The other guy, his comrade, ran off, right? He didn't even want any of it. And then me and No Name wear this dude out in the middle of the yard. It's the only reason why I didn't turn into a race riot is because we had it handled. Yeah. Right?
Yeah, You're just beating these guys up.
We beat it, not even, the other dude ran off. We just beat on the one, right? And then we go to the hole. It was my first shoot term, right? It was a battery on an inmate, right? And, which I think they dropped it down to mutual combat just because it's like reception or whatever.
Right.
But we go to the hole, and then I went on to 4A, which is, you know, the 4-yard at Tehachapi. Yeah. 4A kicked off on me. I went back to the shoe. I went to 4B. From 4B, I went to Salinas Valley, I think it was, and then opened up Kern Valley because I went back to the shoe. Or you know,
how long are these shoe terms? Usually
months at a time. You know, the longest one that I didn't go that long. The longest one that I did was about a year almost. And at that point I had been given what's called an indeterminate shoe program, which is where it's like life in the hole basically, right? So you just keep getting in all this shit. So what we're going to do is we're going to sit you down and you go up to a committee like every 6 months, I think it is, to go to see if they will release you back into the general population.
Crazy. So you go before a parole board within the system.
Yeah.
It's like they just keep putting you in a smaller box.
But I had dropped out by before I went to that, I had already was like, you know, I'm out of here type of thing.
Okay. So in the early days, you're just going to the shoe basically just for either fighting or assaulting people.
I only had that one that was like, no, I'm sorry. I had two where they weren't in self-defense.
Okay.
Right. And I use these term self-defense loosely because I never really considered myself a victim through that. I always looked at it like, you know, this is just another gang that's on the yard and I'm actively participating in this.
So what were those about?
There was only two other ones. The one was the one in Tehachapi, and then there was one where I had to DP and remove a dude from Raymond on the yard at Kern Valley. He was my cellie at the time.
Oh, so, what happened? He violated, or?
Yeah, he was in debt and stuff like that, and they wanted him gone, and I was always looking for opportunities to be able to garner support, you know, and so it was a good opportunity to be like, yo, I'll handle this, and put on kind of like a demo for everybody in the day room and on the yard and all of that. And so it ended up happening, you know.
Okay. What were what's the prison politics amongst the blacks in the state pen in terms of like drug use, drug dealing? Like what are they into? What are the hustles? Do they allow sex offenders to run with them, or is that just a stupid question?
Yeah, it's more complicated than that. I know that a lot of the other races like to say that the black dudes will let anybody, right?
That's the rumor.
That's the rumor, right? You see a rumor of a lot of them are like, at least if you're talking to a white dude or you're talking to, you know, a hardcore SA who's hating on them, right?
Right.
But the blacks are much more, they're like, that's none of my business because that dude's not in my car. But for everybody that's in my car, I need to see your paperwork and you're got to be good. So the crew that I was a part of, when you're from Raymond, the Raymonds were like, you had to do all of that. You had to show your paperwork. You couldn't be in there for anything foul, right? Like any of that. There's some exemptions, and I think it's because in the early years of civil rights and everything else, right, so many black men were having sex charges, and it was like an easy thing to have that put on them.
Yeah, they were being falsely accused of
and all of that. And so when they went into the institution, half of them were like, man, I know this. So it's not the same as when a white dude's in there and it's like a no tolerance policy.
Right.
If you have any type of sex charge, meaning like even if you were accused of that at some point and it's in your paperwork, you're getting smashed on.
Yeah.
You know, those guys are going to smash on.
Yeah.
It's not going to happen like that in the Crips unless you're a part of a circle that is saying, we don't accept that. But what happens is that they'll let that person be on the yard. They're just like, we're not with them.
Right.
You know, they're not.
That is a very black thing. Like,
I'm not
with that ain't my business.
Told on 20. They're like, but I don't know that dude and he's not a part of me. And I get it because they're also like, if you're so worried about it, you go do it.
Right.
You know, why are you telling me about it? Like, we got to all turn against this, you know, you go do that. If you got a problem with it, they're much more like that, which is another big reason why it was easy for me to be like, I don't want to be a part of the woodpile politics in prison, because for me, it made sense to me too. Like when I landed on a yard, the way that I thought was, why am I going to listen to some from some part of California that I never even heard of tell me that I got to take half of my canteen and give it to this and do that and do this and do this type of. I'm not going to do that. So, you know, that was the difference, and that aligned much more, you know, with like the Crip mentality, because the Crip mentality is the same thing. They're like, man, I don't give a fuck, man, if you're my big homie or this or that or any of those types of things, you know? Yeah,
culturally, it's just different.
Or tribal.
It is tribal, and the difference is culturally between, you know, how the whites bid, or especially how the Mexicans, the essays bid. It's like you see it. We see it when we go to Mexico and we interview like these narco guys. There's a very accepted hierarchy.
Totally.
Like, yeah, he's the boss. This is the way things are. And black people don't really go for that as much.
No, it's not as organized. And again, it
does that make them weaker?
No,
in
I don't think so. I think what it is that I'm not going to say it makes them. Yeah, what it does is it makes their power, the potential of what their power could be, weaker for sure.
Yeah.
Because there's so much internal drama that there's not a united front.
Right.
You know, and nor is there a desire to have a united front. You know, even the guys that are more militant, like from the gang that I was from, a lot of the dudes aren't with that. You know, it's like, and a lot of that was built out of the 80s when they were breaking underneath the power structure of the BGF. You know, the BGF were the ones that had Black Guerrilla Family that had the power over the black population when it came to the convicts, you know?
Right.
And then you started having all these new young dudes coming in that were the Crips and these Bloods, and it was starting to like break out of, and it was starting to explode in popularity.
Right.
And now what was happening was all of these Crips that beefed on the street come in and they're being told what to do by the BGF, and they kind of unite to throw some of that power off. You know?
I see.
Same thing with whites went through the same thing with the skinhead, with the ride and the skinheads. So the Nazi lowriders, they had a whole moment in the 90s of FT being the brand and all this shit, right? And there was a bloody war, quiet bloody war in Pelican Bay Shoe of where the NLR and the AB were struggling for power, you know? And the difference that happened was the AB started to tip up, meaning take the hierarchy, take the head of the NLR and turn them into the brand, which created this complete struggle between those that were brand sympathizers, is what they called them, and then those that were what was called FTBing, the brand.
Right.
And then they just kind of crumbled and the AB just continued on.
Right.
Then the skinheads came, P9, USAS, all this type of stuff, right? What they did, they tipped up the top dude for P9. Popeye becomes this, right? Now he's that, blah, blah, which all these guys are all in the hat now too. They're all like S&Y and right?
They're what?
A lot of them dropped out and are S&Y and all that type of stuff. Oh yeah, huge population of those guys. It's always like turning over in that way.
Totally.
But they, what they did was they, instead of trying to just like completely smash the whole skinhead, you know, thing, they started to just make them enforcers for the brand. Right. You know, by making those leaders of the skinheads brand members.
Do the brand have a presence in the state of California now, the state system?
Not as much as like what it was.
Right.
You know, those guys, they're really, with the short corridor, they went to the feds. A lot of them with that. They got busted up and with RICO'd and all of that type of thing. I went on, when I was, when I dropped out, I went on to have many cellies that were XNLR. I had cellies that were both brand or they were associates, right? But guys that were very serious from all of that. And so I got kind of like an extensive history on it in a lot of ways. And they don't have the power that they did before. Drugs it up in a lot of different ways. The feds coming in and RICOing and it up in a lot of ways. And then the S&Y program it up in a lot of ways. Because now guys have the ability to like get away from it.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
And so being locked in the back in the short corridor, which they have shut down now, but the short corridor is an aspect of Pelican Bay where it's like they cut off all form of, they try to isolate those guys as much as possible because of their ability to have, you know, to call shots throughout the entire state of California.
Yeah, this is, if you want an example of the harshest, most kind of like Orwellian, you know, dystopian kind of prison and incarceration of human beings in the United States, I think the short corridor at Pelican Bay is probably it. Can you explain what that was? Tell us like Pelican Bay. Yeah, so I was never in it, right? I never went to Pelican Bay, never went to the short corridor or Pelican Bay Shoe, but I had many cellies that had and many people. And if you're anybody that's been in the system on a level 4 and been in for a while, then you know what the f it is.
but it's a shoe within the shoe. It's a aspect of this, and the shoe stands for segregated housing unit or security housing unit, one of those. And it's just a top tier and a bottom tier of cells where guys spend 24 hours out of the day. They have been given indeterminate amount of time in there. A lot of them have been back in there well into 20 years, 30 years, all of that, right? And it's a way for the system to isolate them so that way they don't have the same reach that they would before.
So the regular shoe, I think you're allowed out like an hour a day, right? They have shoe yards.
I mean, they still will in the short corridor. They still are allowed out to those dog kennels and stuff like that, right? But it's all single cell. Yeah. They don't have cellies, and their communication is so limited. Right. No telephone. No
visits, obviously.
Visits are all behind glass, so they still can have visits, but they can't have any type of contact visit, and their is vetted very, very strongly by the institution.
Right.
And there you have what's called IGI, which is a whole task force inside the institution that's designated to gangs, crime, and they are the ones that bust other officers too. So like, they have their whole separate thing going on, and they work directly with law enforcement on the outside and all of that. That's where you hear the goon squad. They're all black patches.
Right. And so the short corridor, the box within the box.
Yep.
Within the box.
Yeah.
It's a big box, smaller box, smallest box.
Smallest box.
And it's a torturous place.
Yeah.
Right.
In a lot of ways, those guys are back there for 30 years because it's also one of the safest places. Like a lot of those, so when they shut down, when they closed it, because they now have stopped that indeterminate shoe program, and they've released a lot of the guys from the short corridor back onto the population. Wow. And I was obviously not a part of the GP at the time, but when you're on a yard that's right next to the yard, and when you've been a part of everything, and you just hear of all of the shit that's going on. And so a lot of those guys were landing on the yard, and now you would have on one yard like 7 brothers is what it's called. Brothers is like, for the S's it'd be carnales, right? For the Y's they just say brothers, but they're the guys that are running the thing. So you have 7 guys on that yard now that are taxing, right? Everybody on that yard. And believe this, that those guys are not impervious to developing crazy egos, right? In the same way that you see with somebody that is like very wealthy or that is in that way. Right. And so some of them are drunk on their power.
Right. And I survived 30 years in the short corridor. Like that's
well, no, it's not necessarily. Yeah, there's all of that's inside of it, but it's also like I'm a brother. I'm a part of the table. I'm at the. I am a shot caller. Yeah, and they're the highest you can get in that. Right. There's only a certain amount. They don't just let.
No. Yeah, it's a very kind of elite group.
It's a very elite group.
Criminals
used to be. Because it changed as time went by, and it started to become a little bit more watered down as the short corridor and indeterminate shoes and stuff started to affect things. Those guys started to probably lessen their standards a little bit, and went haywire. That's why you have stuff like what happened in the 90s, where a lot of guys testified, went to the feds, a lot of guys, But my point out of the thing is I remember at Calipat when it was all first happening and they were letting these guys out from the back that were MA members, right? And they landed on the yard and one of them was moving on the other one because there's internal politics. They're not all just like brothers. They're all trying to have the most power and get the biggest piece of the pie. So this one is moving on the other guy and he's having all his soldiers do it. Well, what happened was this guy gets surrounded, right? Completely encircled by the other guy's foot soldiers. And they fight off. Their whole thing is to just fight off any support that's going to come for that brother right there. Right. And 2 guys are in the middle of that ring and they stab that dude to death. 30 years in the short corridor, came out to the GP yard and within 2 months you're killed. Wow. So it's like, it's also so intricate and I don't know.
It's kind of like the streets. Like people come out after 30 years and they're like, I want my spot. And they're like, hey, times have changed. We don't give a
Yeah, you had a dude from Raymond like that. You had a dude, older dude from Raymond. He'd been down forever. He was a G in the system. He went home. He started like, you know, pushing the young dudes around. He started jacking them for their dough, taking their money from them. And one of those young dudes popped him, killed him, you know.
Yeah.
And, you know,
so you were at Calipat when that happened, when that guy got stabbed to death?
Yeah, but it wasn't on my yard because I was on the dropout yard already.
Oh, you were already on the dropout.
It was on one of the other yards. But the thing is that this is the thing too, is before something like that happens, there'll be an influx on the yard of all these people that are like getting the out. They're dropping out, getting away. And so they're coming over to the yard, you know, or you have the officers from those yards coming over, talking about everything that's going on. And so you hear what all took place and how it all happened and all of that. You know?
Yeah. So how are you during this time before you drop out? What are you doing in there to hustle?
Yeah. Okay. So when I first dropped out and I land on the yard at Calipat, I'm there for a couple of months, just kind of like working out and getting my bearings and stuff like that. And I end up getting pulled into the cell with this old guy, right, named Hap, Big Hap from Purdue. And he was, you know, biker guy from back in the day. And he was a Golden Gloves boxer, right? Like all this different stuff. He was no joke. And one of his main things was he drew caricatures, right? For years and years and years. He'd been down at that time for, you know, probably 20 years at that time. And he went on to be a big mentor to me. But he drew caricatures and cards and stuff like that. And one day I was up on my bunk and I was watching TV and he goes, yo, man, let me ask you something. I go, yeah. And he goes, what do you do? You know? And I go, what do you mean? And he goes, well, what do you do? What do you do with your time? You know, how do you take care of yourself? And I go, well, I don't, like my dad or something will send me some money or, you know, or a friend or whatever. And I get some canteen and I just work out, read and watch TV and stuff. And he goes, oh, that's cool. That's cool. He goes, but don't take this as any disrespect, but you have life in prison. And it doesn't mean that people don't love you or it doesn't mean that your family doesn't love you or anything, but sometimes what happens is the years go by and everybody gets older and life moves on and stuff like that. And you probably won't always have somebody there to take care of you. So you have to start thinking about how you're going to take care of yourself.
Right.
And, you know, I had never had a job or anything at this time.
Right.
I never. I was a little stick-up kid when I ran away. So I never. Even in the jail, in pen, I still had never been given a job. I was on close A custody, right? I was like low pecking order. I'm not going to just like, you know, it's not like it was later on where I would land on a yard and a dude's like, yo, man, do you want a job? You want to get this? You want to get that? You know, type of thing. So, so he says, if you want, I'll teach you how to draw. And he goes, here's the good thing. He goes, good and bad. The good part is you'll never go to the hole for it, right? You won't get in trouble for it. And you'll always be able to take care of yourself. The bad part is you won't get rich from it, like if you're selling dope on the yard and stuff like that. You know, he goes, but you'll always be able to take care of yourself because there's always going to be somebody that wants to send a card home to their loved one. And so I thought about it and it just made sense to me. And at this time I had no idea of like how far my art was actually going to go, you know, and it went really, really far. So I take him up on it and I tell him, yeah, sure, I'll learn how to draw. And so he starts teaching me how to draw cards. And I start off with like Precious Moments, Mickey Mouse, stuff like that. And I would draw a little balloon with a happy birthday and then sell it for like 8 suits, right? Yeah, $2, I think it was. And I remember when I did it the first time and like I got the 8 soups and I felt like a real sense of accomplishment. It was much different when you kind of like work really hard and then you earn a buck as opposed to you like work a buck or take a buck. You know, it's way different. And I feel like it changes you. So, and it did for me, it changed me in the way that I decided, even though I didn't ever have a job, I knew that I was developing in a way that I didn't want to develop. I felt like, what is somebody that's my age on the streets that's considered to be a healthy person? What do they do? You either go to school or you get a job. And school wasn't an option. And so what I did was I took the artwork and I said, I'm going to set 8 hours a day with a 1 hour lunch break. And I'm going to turn this into my job. And I did that for years. I fast forward to like 5 years later, and I'm doing beautiful portraits. And I have a curator in Laguna named Suzanne Walsh, and I'm having art shows, and I'm like,
you're having art shows from
on
prison?
the outside from prison.
So you would send her the art and they would put on an exhibit?
Yeah. And when Hap said you couldn't get rich, I really got to the place of where I was having packages sent. I did portraits for everybody in the yard. And then I was like, this is where he was such a great mentor, because he also wouldn't let me trace anything, right? Like you could get a photocopy and you can trace an outline of that picture. Right. And now there's one step out of the way that you need to do to create a beautiful, lifelike, realistic portrait, right? But you skip a lot of important steps on learning how to sketch that, right? From what you look at. And then there's another step that I learned about when I started to go to college and take art courses and stuff, which is still life drawing, right? Like looking at you, not at a photo, but you sitting across from me and learning how to start to sketch you from perspective and lighting and light source and all these different things. And so I started to dive deep into that. And I took it as a job, man, and it exploded. Seriously. And I went into tattooing. I became the guy on the yard. I've done wrapped full heads, necks, tattoo. My main thing was cover-ups. Anybody that like, you know, me swastikas I covered up, man, with beautiful artwork.
Right.
Yeah, ex-skinheads that were like, dude, I don't want this on me anymore. And I just blast them back with a full chest plate, dude. Beautiful work.
Now, you know, obviously you're on a level 4. Administration's got a lot of other things to worry about, but is tattooing illegal still?
Yeah, it's still illegal and all of that, but it's also like if you're a reg and you're around guys and stuff, you know when to do it and not do it. And then there's officers that allow it. Happy was a tattoo artist too, the dude that taught me. And so, you know, he literally had officers sometimes from other yards coming over and being like, yo, I'll come in tattoos from you.
You tatted up the officers?
No, I never did. I never did. But I'm just saying, I was witnessing them talking to Hap. Now imagine, here's this guy. I mean, he's done it before.
Yeah.
You know, he's an old Folsom tattooing officers at times, you know, so.
And they knew you were a lifer too. I imagine the guards treat lifers that are behaving themselves with a little more deference, right?
Yeah, but I went through a hard phase of when I was young of where they were just bullies, you know, and they just treated me like, they treated me like, you know, and they're demeaning and abusive towards young guys because they don't see you as somebody that they should respect, you know? Right. And so that was a hard part. But at the same time, there was also officers, few of them, that treated me like there was this old guy, right, who was he was working on his second pension. He was an ex-military police officer, and now he was a correctional officer. And his name was Bishop, Jimmy Bishop. And he was like an older guy in there, reminded me of kind of like a grandpa, you know? Mm-hmm. And that's how he treated me. He treated me like I was like a grandkid to him, meaning like there was a time when I snuck from the yard and I jumped on the phone when it wasn't my phone time, and he let me finish my phone call, and then I hung it up. And right when I thought I got away with it, he was like, yo, go take a seat over there. I had to sit there, and then he's gonna go do his rounds and all that, and this and that. You just gotta sit there and think about what you did. You know? and then he comes over and he's like, you know why you're sitting right here? And then, you know, for me, I was like, because I jumped on the phone when I wasn't supposed to, and he's like, yeah, that's right. Why don't you just ask? So like how you talk to him and how he talks to you was a dynamic that was more, that made me feel like I was on the streets. It made me feel like I wasn't just like some piece of shit, you know, that this officer was reprimanding to just be an asshole to. And he went on to just like really, it's things like that and moments like that. They collected as time went by, and I started to feel sometimes even a responsibility towards them. Like I didn't want to let Bishop down sometimes. Right,
that's it.
I didn't want to, and so it made me feel a little more accountable in a lot of ways. And so the officers were as important to my change as Happy was, you know, or as I was for myself. You know, they were as equally as important. It took that too in order for me to, you know, kind of like understand that they're not my enemy. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like for a long time, I was always like authority, cops, this type of shit. Like you just don't even, they're not real people. They're not in they don't know your life. They don't know you, you know, type of thing. But
they're doing time too.
they're doing time, but a lot of them, they're just people.
Yeah.
They're just people. And you got good ones, you got bad ones, and, all of that. And I used to find clever ways in order to be able to bump against the bad ones, of like ones that would still try to do that to me. I remember one time there was this sergeant who, for no reason, I was in the gym, I was cleaning the gym, I was a porter at the time, and he was bored sitting in here at the cop shop with all the other officers, and out of the blue he calls me. He says, "Corcoran, come here a second." And so I like dragged the mop over. I'm like, "Yeah, what's up, man?" And he goes, "Let me ask you something." And I set the mop down, and I could tell that he's getting ready to fuck with me. I already been in so long. I just was like, I know he's getting ready to fuck with me. And so he goes, "Does it bother you to have to like live on this yard, around all these, child and stuff like, does it bother you that you got to be around all of them?" And he was being an asshole about it, like trying to be judgmental, about why, how come I'm on this yard? Why aren't I, like the hardcore smashing on these dudes, And so I looked at him, I said, "Oh no, Sarge, that's a good question." I said, "Let me ask you something." He goes, "What?" I said, does it bother you that you have to protect them?" Right? Nice. Yeah. And the other officers, they went, "Whoa," like that. Yeah. And he was like, "Well, it's my job, this, that, this, and that." And they got all upset. And I said, "Well, look, let me tell you what my job is. My job is not to sit here and try to right any wrong of anybody else. I'm trying to figure my own life out. I'm trying to right what I got going on in my life. I don't have time to be worrying about what somebody else did and what they got going on." And da-da-da-da-da. And I felt like it was a win. It is. Like it was one of those ones where I was able to articulate a quick response.
That's great.
Yeah.
I could never have done that. I would have just been steaming for the next month.
Yeah.
And the hardest thing, the hardest thing to do when you're in a powerless situation, like being an inmate, is to control what comes at you, because ultimately that's the only control you have, is how you react. You always have a choice. It's like the Viktor Frankl, everybody reads
Man's Search for Meaning.
That's it, when they go into the joint. And he was in the Holocaust. He was part of he was in a Nazi concentration camp, and that's where he developed that. He was like, "Oh, it doesn't matter, I'm in the most oppressive situation on earth, but I still get to choose how I react to things." So that's the hardest. I mean, really takes a powerful, mature person who's done a lot of time too,
Yeah, but I think it was less about the time, because you have a lot of dudes that are in there for 30 years who never like emotionally grow or in any way progress, right? Yeah. They just become paralyzed in their development.
Yep.
And I think like, you're talking about Viktor Frankl and like existentialism and things like that in this theory. And what I gathered from him was the necessity for purpose and for meaning in order for us to feel that harmony and that peace that we're looking for.
Yeah.
And I remember I was talking to my dad one day, and I was telling him, like, when the appeals were all done and I'd been in for some years now, and I was like, "Dad, like, I don't know, what is this? Like, what kind of life is this, man?" And my dad said, "Wherever you're at," he goes, "may not be the place that you choose or where you want to be or whatever, but that's where you are, and that's where your life is, and your life has meaning and it has purpose." And so at first I started to dive, because I was so heavily into art at the time. I was like, well, maybe my purpose is art. Maybe I'm an artist, and that's my purpose.
Yeah.
And so I was like, I held on to that for a while, but I started to like see documentaries and stuff about people that like all of a sudden lose their sight, or they lose a limb, and art gets taken away from them in some type of way. And so I was like, my purpose has to be deeper than that. It can't be something that like can be taken in that way. And I think that's when I started to identify my belief system and my principles, right, as my purpose. And I started to kind of talk about it like that, where I called it my purpose through my principles. And I got heavily into what were my principles. If somebody asked me, "Tyler, what do you believe in? What are your principles?" Or "Who are you?" Or those types of things. And I realized that like the thing that I value above everything else is empathy, is kindness, is compassion, is understanding, right? Communication, strength, right? But not strength in the sense of being able to dominate, strength in the sense of like, it's this spectrum of what's my capacity to hold, you know, how much can I hold? What kind of anxiety, how much stress, how much hopelessness, like what is my capacity to hold? And if I can hold more, I can be stronger. And then reframe what all that is, right? You know, and all of that. But anyways, these principles, I started to realize like, you know what? I'm not going to make any excuse on why it is that I can't be kind to just because I'm in prison. Just because I'm in an environment that says that this is not a place for that and that I need to navigate this space with like suspicion and feeling unsafe. Yeah. What if I flip that? What if I say, you know what, I've been through so much and survived it. What if I just trust the fact that if something dangerous or unsafe is around me, I'm going to identify it and know how to remove myself from the situation, right? And that then allowed me to fall into that space of being able to go, you know, I'm going to apply empathy instead of apathy, right? I'm going to like practice being kind. Yeah. That turned into being of service, right? Gave me a deeper understanding of remorse, of amends. How do you go about amends, right? Like,
so you're working the AA system and you're not even an alcoholic, but you're basically working the 12 steps.
In a lot of different ways. I was taking a lot of that and I was integrating that into the way that I looked at life. Yeah. You know, and then I was reading, you know, so much on all these different things, Viktor Frankl, Carl Rogers, right? I identified with him saying that you're not really going to heal unless you're like coming from a safe space. So how do I create a safe space so that way I can focus on healing, you know?
Wow. I mean, you know, unfortunately, not every inmate is as smart as you because you just like, you had it was almost like you were growing your brain. Well, you were 18, your brain's not even fully formed when you went into prison, but you certainly got your education there.
Yeah, I was intentional.
Yeah, that's right.
And I was intentional with my development.
And you're also talented. So through these years of developing, you're exhausting your appeals. How many appeals do you have?
Yeah, so, well, I mean, you go through your direct appeal, which is, and then if your direct appeal gets denied, then you get sent to some circuit. And if the circuit gets denied, then you go to like this other circuit.
Yeah,
there's a lot of different
Supreme
steps.
Court, yeah.
The Supreme Court. I think it's the Ninth Circuit at the Supreme Court is the last level.
And you're appealing your sentence or the conviction?
No, I was appealing the conviction at first, and but that ended up through all the gangbanging, and I ended up just doing so much time away from that I got time barred. Right. So like if you don't file in a certain amount of time, I think it's a 1-year deadline that you have to file in the Supreme Court after your direct appeal has been denied. But it's all up to you to know these things. So you got to go to the law library. You have to educate yourself. You have to. And I was too busy gangbanging, so I missed that year deadline. So I was time barred and couldn't object my guilt right in that way. And then later on, when all of the Graham and like juveniles being given life and all of that type of stuff, we refiled an appeal that had to do with my sentence.
Right.
Because you couldn't be given life without, you couldn't be sentenced to LWOP at the time if you didn't have a murder. Mm-hmm. But that left this gray area of litigation for all of those that had like 300 to life.
Right.
You still have life without.
Still life, yeah.
But now you had to talk about that. So then that went through a lot of litigation. My case was a part of that.
Wow.
So
are you writing your own appeals? Are you writing your own arguments?
No, Joe Patel came into my life.
Right. Okay. Gotcha. Joe Patel.
So Joe Patel comes into my life, man, and he's a stud of an attorney. He does big stuff all through. Even now, he's all just so heavily involved. But it got denied, right? Mm-hmm. Like all of that got denied, and then when it got denied, it was because the California Senate bill got passed, SB 260, which then allowed me to go to the parole board at 20 years. So what that did was now is saying there's your meaningful opportunity, right, to go to the parole board. There's no reason to resentence you because now the Senate bill has happened and now you're going to be able to go to the parole board at 20 years anyways.
How long had you been in when that happened, when the Senate bill happened?
I don't know, 15 years maybe, 13 years, 14 years.
Right. So
maybe.
this is pretty recently.
Yeah.
Relatively recently, the last 10 years.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's all very recent.
And was that that real moment where you were like, oh, I can get out of here?
No. By that time right there, it was like, I mean, it was so far away still that I just thought different. I thought like this. I thought like, you know what? I live my life the way that I live. How can I articulate it? The way that I live my life is going to put me in the best position if the opportunity ever comes for me to be able to come home, right? I believe in being able to not cause any type of conflict. I don't want to have a negative impact in anybody's life, right? I understand that my choices have a ripple effect, and what kind of ripple effect do I want that to be? All of those different things. And so I really didn't think about coming home in the sense, because it was too painful to constantly kind of chase that carrot. Mm-hmm. Instead, I was like, you know what? I'm just going to live my life that's conducive to that ever happening, and then not really think about that happening. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And then what that did for me was it allowed it to be really authentic, you know, where I wasn't chasing, coming home wasn't my motivation for my lifestyle and for my belief system. And then what ended up happening was as I started to get closer to the parole board, then I started to prepare in the way that you need to prepare, which is like, you got to put a parole board packet together, impact statement, all of these different things. There's a whole thing on that. And I started to be a part of groups where we would do mock hearings and practice and all this different stuff. That was, you know, it was amazing. There was amazing guys that I was doing this with.
And how long?
But that's not how I went home.
Right.
That's not even how I went home.
So, okay. Tell us. Okay. And this whole time, are you still selling art?
Yeah. So this whole time I'm still selling art, but I had moved past the art. I was barbering. Okay. I was still full blown doing portraits, but I seriously had a 6-month waiting list. So when guys,
like, you were really making money. How much would you sell? How much could you sell a good painting on the outside for to Laguna housewives?
Yeah. So like on the outside, it would be like, let's say, I think on the outside, it's like maybe the most I ever got was like 5,000 or something. Maybe, I don't know. I can't even remember.
It's an incredible amount of money
for
prison.
Yeah, because my pay number was 32 cents an hour to cut hair, you know? So I was like, and that was the top pay number. I remember I was on the RAS crew, this recycling crew. I've been in the kitchens, I've been in the library, I was in all this different, and because I was always in a job and I would go, man, why do I want to be in this kitchen? I love books. I want to be in the library. And then I would work for a year of like making sure that, you know, I'd be in the library, I'd be helping out, I'd do to let this, you know, and I'd get into things. So my point is that, you know, like I had 8 cents an hour at one point where you were lucky to buy a jar of Folgers coffee at the end of the month.
It's like 1912 in prison. It's like insane. How much you getting paid?
But what's wild is that we still had the same prices out here. The coffee was all of the
crazy, bro.
A jar of coffee was like $9 in there, you know, and that was your whole paycheck for the month. So you had to hustle. You got to find a hustle in there. You can't just depend on the state or on a pay number to do it for you. You need to have that.
It's brutal.
Which helped me when I came home, by the way, you know, just kind of like, cause I didn't like look for a handout in any type of way. I worked super hard. And I knew what hard work was. And so I was able to like fall easily into that because it was my life.
Before we wrap up, you tell us how you got resentenced, like how you actually got before the judge to get resentenced. Because we kind of glossed over it. The riot where you almost got killed, where you got sliced. What was that over? Because people are going to want to know.
Yeah, that was over me being a white Crip. I landed on the yard. Shoe kick out yard, Kern Valley, right? And it had already been a lead up to that. Like I had been snatched up by IGI and taken to the hole like 3 or 4 times. There was even a part in there where the skinheads had got caught in R&R, these 2 guys with scalpels from the outside hospital that they had smuggled back to the institution, and they had a kite with my name on it, right? Because then they were going to my yard. So IGI had been coming back and forth. And what they did was they locked everything down. They searched everything, tried to clear out as much weapons as possible. And then they let us up, right? And they were like, boom, let's see what happens. So
just for people to clarify, the shoe kick out yard, it's everybody who's leaving the shoe.
Everybody's leaving the shoe to go to a 180 yard, right? And open up this new yard.
That's a dangerous place.
It's a very dangerous place. Yeah. Okay. So Mini 14, live rounds, all that.
Right.
They're not around. And dude's hands were getting blown off, shot off, all types of shit over there. Oh, yeah. So I walk out to the yard. We get word that it's gonna happen. It's gonna go down. And we come up off of lockdown, and I walk out to the yard, and I'm walking laps with the fellas, because they wouldn't let me go anywhere by myself. And the Crips, and I was never going anywhere by myself. Even if I showered, you'd have like 2 Crips outside of the shower to make sure that I didn't get attacked while I was in the shower.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you were a target by the white gangs.
Yeah, I was green lighted. It could not be. If they don't move on me, those dudes are getting moved on.
Right.
And there was a slew of white guys that are on the S&Y because of me, There's every institution I went through, there would be a fallout of guys before finally the ones that are left are the that are going to do it, you know? And some of them I learned later on too are the dudes that are going to do it, but they didn't want to do it.
Right.
They felt bad for me.
Yeah.
Some dudes looked at me and they were like, that dude's a little kid, literally.
Yeah.
They were like, I don't feel right going over there and handling that dude,
right.
man. And they're like, I'm tired of all this shit and get out of there,
So you were split in the yard. Do you have a shank on you? Do you have like a scalpel?
So I don't have anything on me.
Okay.
Everything's been cleared out, right? There's really no weapons on as far as any of the homeboys or anything. I go out to the yard. I'm walking laps. As I'm walking laps, I decide I'm tired of waiting on this. I'm just going to initiate it. And so, because I was like, man, every time I wait, I get hurt.
Yeah. When
I don't wait and I just kick that off, then it tumbles and I get beat up a little bit, but at least I go to the hole and I'm like not all up. But so I walk out to the yard and we were on it was an A yard, I think, at Kern Valley at the time. And it was brand new, it was just opened up. And as I'm walking laps, the wood pile, their handball wall was over by the water fountain at the time. And so I go over to the water fountain to try to get as close as possible, right? Try to be as sneaky and get as close as possible. And I go and I drink from the water. And as I'm drinking from the water, this dude that was with me from Grape nudges me and he goes, yo, they're looking at you, man, and they're plotting on you. And so I remember as I'm drinking the water, I look over and they're like huddled up, right? And it's probably, it's not many, bro. They're not very many white guys in the yard. So they're maybe 15, 20 dudes maybe, right? And I look over at them and they're like kneeling down and doing this and doing that. And they just pissed me the off, right? And so I stood up and I remember I wiped my mouth and I went, you guys looking at like that? And they stood up and they went, what? And I rushed into the pile.
Wow.
Boom, boom, boom. And all the Crips and everybody, all the blacks flooded from the basketball court and that exploded. And in the process of that happening, I don't even remember when it happened when the dude sliced my neck, right? I remember feeling the guy from behind grab my hair and like tug my head back. And then I felt like a tug on my skin, but I was fighting so much that I didn't even realize it until everything had been quelled. And
did they shoot the tear gas?
Yeah, tear gas. They were busting block guns, tear gas, everything. They're spraying, but they weren't coming onto the yard. The way that Kern Valley is that the yard is fenced off. You have 2 yards on 1 yard, right? So you have a huge wall down the middle and you have a full track on one side, which is the lower, and a full track on the other side, which is the upper. And then between the administrative buildings, you have another fence with a catwalk and barbed wire. So that way you can't like rush into the program office. They had already dealt with that before. So they like built up all of that. And
so they're shooting live rounds down
so
from their
busting,
Mini 14s?
I don't know I can't remember if they shot any live rounds or not. I don't know. It all sounds crazy, but they're responding, but they're not coming onto the yard. They're waiting for us to tire ourselves out first. It was the whole yard, the entire thing.
Essays too?
No, essays were out of it and all that type. Yeah, they weren't. And so anyways, I felt the guy, but I didn't know what happened. I was still fighting. And then this is the one that Gary was in with me with G, right? And so when the dust settles, I'm proned out And I look over at me, probably over to, the corner of the room here, and G's right there. He's looking at me. He's got eyes all swollen shut. And I remember he's like smiling. Crazy. I loved his ass though. He's like smiling, which made me smile, right? So I'm like, because we're like, yeah, we survived this. Right? That's how we're feeling. So anyways, and there's a sea of white dudes around us, right? And then all the other fellas are all in the back, right? And it was just me and G, right? Holding it down, man, at that last moment. And the nurse comes running out. And when the nurse comes running out, she's like, alarms are going off and sirens and here comes medical, and medical's running out, and there's this nurse that has this bag, and she's like, boom, boom, boom. And then she looks over at me as she's running onto the yard, and she goes, oh my God. And she runs, and I'm like, what? Like, I can't believe, I'm like wondering what the f*** is going on. And she runs to me, and then she starts holding my neck together. Right. And I look down and blood is like just flooding. Right. Boom. And so she's like holding it together, and she starts doing gauze and all this type of shit. And they're like, we got to get this dude to medical, blah, blah, blah. So they zip tie me all up, zip, zip, zip. And then they like get me up and then escort me off and throw me in a van and drive me to the, triage spot in the middle of the institution. And then they get me in there and they like glue it and do all their type of stuff. And then that's when I kind of like knew that I was, that I had gotten sliced up.
How deep was it?
It was deep. It was like, I think they said like 1 millimeter, 2 millimeters from hitting the main artery. Yeah, it was probably because I was fighting with another guy that stopped him from being able to get the full depth that he needed.
Wow. So they got the weapons through, evidently.
Yeah, it was, there's always something, man.
Following that, did they find out who it was? Did the IGI guys?
Nobody ever got shot. You had dudes you had a handful of white dudes that went back to the hole with me, right? And then all the Crips went back with me. And then within a week, they all got released back out, though. They get released back to the yard. And then only me and like a few guys stay that were like directly identified, as participants and stuff.
Did they try to get you to identify who your
of course.
attacker was?
When you first come in, when you're like in medical and all of that, that's why you have to be careful when you're in that lifestyle too, because you'll also have a nurse come in, right? And the nurse will start to talk to you about like, so anyways, what's going on? You don't feel like it's a guard,
right.
And so you got to kind of like they'll sometimes put in your incident report and stuff like that. But
do you know who did it?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I knew who did it. And what's funny is I never ran into him later on. I ran into him later, but not where we were like on a yard together. We were like in the hole and like that. And
did you bring it up?
Yeah. I was like, you almost got me, man. This and that. Because these dudes, what's funny is a lot of these dudes had a lot of respect for me. We went to the hole, and these guys used to give me coffee, all this type. And it wasn't all because they're trying to set me up. We all knew what time it was. There's no like lulling me into thinking these guys are my friends, right? But they used to say, man, they were like, you took a lot of balls, man. You going out there, dude, and doing this, And so
it was almost like it wasn't. It's almost like it wasn't personal.
It wasn't, and this is a funny part. This is why I talk about appropriation and stuff. Is because one is I was putting myself and my life on the line for something that is way, way deep, historically deep. Not just Crips, but gangs and a lot of destruction in the Black community and like all of these different things. And I'm kind of just playing with it, And like people are really growing up in this stuff, man, and they're f***ed up by it. Generational trauma is taking place. Yeah. And then on the other hand of that too is when I went into the joint, everything is so militarized in a lot of different ways, and everything becomes so racially charged that now I'm like reading these books from the older homies on the yard that's like George Jackson, Johnny Spain, all these different like real like Black activists, and they're all talking about how people that look like me are all pieces of shit. And I didn't vibe with that either. I was like, man, I'm like, that's not what I'm not. So I didn't feel right. And it all kind of like led to to that moment of me saying like, what am I doing, with this whole thing here, man? Even the kindness that these dudes that just try to kill me on the yard, right? Just the fact that it wasn't personal even was a thing that I could understand and be like, you know what? You're right. I'm putting you guys I hurt everybody. I land on the yard, all the homies get hurt because they all got a ride with me. That all makes me feel f***ed up.
Right.
All their visits, everything. It's all, I jeopardize all that. And then all these white dudes that half the time they don't want to do this, but I'm refusing to go anywhere.
Right.
So now dudes are getting stabbed behind me. These officers who are just wanting to come in and do their 8 and go home. And now all of a sudden they're like, I mean, I can imagine a dude as I am now being at home and being like, babe, I don't know how work's going to go tomorrow. Crazy in the institution.
White Crip,
this dude rolled up. He's a Crip. He won't lock it up. He's like, it's going to go down. And like, I don't know what's going on.
Right.
And so it just made me feel so terrible all the way around. You know,
that makes so much sense. You being a white Crip is causing chaos all around you. It's affecting all these people.
Everybody and nobody really. And I had dudes that were. I remember there was a dude from my neighborhood who was like one of the legends. I got on the yard and in the cells and celled up with dudes that were legends from Raymond, right? Who on the streets they're like folklore, you know.
Yeah.
And I remember I was in the cell with one of them and IGI came and got me and took me to the hole because they had received information that my life was in jeopardy. And then as time went by and I started to realize things and stuff, I realized, you know, that was the homie. The homie dropped that kite to get me the out of there.
Wow.
And at first I was like, man, this old watered down, I'm out here risking my life, you know? And here this dude's been down like 30 years, you know? And that's how I felt at that time. I was like, man, we're supposed to go out here and handle it, cowboy up and handle this like some G's. Flash to years later and me having a little bit of maturity and understanding and like my own time in the system that starts to go up there to get close to even what it might feel like for 30 years, right?
Yeah.
And I realized, man, that dude is so over this shit.
Yeah.
All of it.
Mm-hmm.
All of us are in here sticking to a way of life at a decision that we made when we were like 15, 14. Yeah. I was 15 when I got put on, you know, and here this guy is 30 years later. He's an old man. He had like gray fro and you know, and like, and I started to realize like, that's really a position to put this dude in. Here I just show up, some dude that wasn't even born yet when he was out, you know, a white dude who's taking on a whole struggle and an identity that is like not his.
Yeah.
And he's got to risk his life for me after 30 years, man. He's got bigger fish to fry.
Totally.
And so what he was doing was he wasn't ranking out. He wasn't being soft. That dude was showing true compassion to me because he was like, you know what? He's thinking about himself, but the way that he did it, he could have politicked his way out of it to where I got somehow left out to dry. But instead, that dude tried to get me somewhere safe and out the way.
Wow.
And I'm like, that's a powerful thing. You know?
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
So,
and that's why these long sentences also don't make sense unless they need to. Because you're such a different, I mean, your cells regenerate every 7 years, right?
Yeah.
So it's like you take a guy who murdered somebody at 17, he's a different person by the time he's 40.
Yeah.
You know?
And I think it's all situational, right? Like we try to make dealing with humans bureaucratic. Right. And you can't do that when it comes to the system because you're really, you know, impacting people's lives, all of this different stuff, you know, and but that goes back into the whole point of, you know, people that are like angry and resentful and petty and small-minded in their own way.
That's right.
I had to, when I came home, you know, I went through a deep grieving process at first, right? And it wasn't because I was institutionalized in the way of like, oh, I'm like wearing my shower shoes in the shower and, you know, and all that you hear a lot of short timers talk about.
Right.
Dude from 3 years is like, yeah, so anyways, homie, you know, I was like, saw this knife right here. I put it in my, but I realized what the fuck was I doing, you know? And like, that's not, in my opinion, that's not real.
I was a short timer. I was 3 years. Well, I had less than 3 years. The only thing I still do to this day is I immediately, when I'm taking a I immediately start flushing.
That's true.
You know what I mean?
That's true. I do that too.
And then I wrap when I go to bed at night, I wrap a shirt over my eyes. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I didn't know you were a short timer in that way. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. But that's all. But yeah, there's not that much residual
there's
PTSD.
That because I do remember when I ate my first meal, the thing that I did, I ate it with a spoon and then I wiped off my spoon afterwards and I went to put it in my back pocket and I was like, what am I doing? You know, I don't need to do this anymore. But I just meant it in like the intense gangster way that people talk about.
Of course.
But I went through a grieving process because I had got to a place where I had built a life that I was really like, I was happy. You know? And I had joy in my life, and I felt like I had purpose and meaning. My life had purpose and meaning. And I had a whole community of friends that I had. And this is the other reason why you got to get away from gangs in this way is that you don't build real friendships. You only build bonds out of trauma.
Right.
No, you got that are really there for you and that will die for you, but they're all fucked up. Like the saying is you tell a little homie like you wouldn't do nothing I won't put you through anything that I wouldn't do. But if you're willing to put yourself through up, then you know you're going to put me through some up. Right. So it's a bunch of people that are bonded through traumatic experiences.
Trauma bonding.
That's it. And makes for a warped relationship, right? That doesn't give that room for growth. When I got away from that and I started to be authentic in the way that I felt, and I started to be honest with myself and therefore live honestly, I was able to develop real relationships, know people for sure. My best friend, Ronnie Krigbaum, right, who did 25 years, white dude from Rialto, right, was in for a murder. I went and picked him up. Wow. I went back to the institution that I paroled from, pulled up in my car to the guard shack. The guard leaned out and went, "No fucking way." And I went, "What's up, man?" He goes, "What are you doing here?" I went, "I'm here to pick up Krigbaum." He goes, "That's right. You guys were road dogs. You guys came down from the higher levels together." I went, "Yeah." Because how long you known him? I go, "We've been following each other for almost 15 years. And I go, and then I went, "God damn." Because it's out in the middle of the low desert. I went, "It's hot as out here." I go, "Man, it's hard for me to get away from Malibu," because now I was renting a house in Malibu, right? It's me and Steph.
Yeah, you got this hot ass girlfriend.
Yeah, I went from O'Brien summer sausages to like Mountain Spring Valley glass bottled water. You know, I'm like
$7 bottle of water.
I'm shopping in Erewhon for raw milk, right? So it's way different.
Yeah.
A life that a prison guard doesn't even know about.
No.
And now here I was, here I was 2 years later, because I've been home now for 3.5 years. In November, it'll be 4 years.
So you still on paper?
No, I discharged my parole after 16 months.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah. Which was wild because my parole officer was like, "What is your life?" You know, I started training Jay-Z's whole circle when I came home.
Okay. Real quick.
Yeah, there's a lot.
So we're gonna cut over and have a bonus chat on the. Would you mind sticking around just for a quick, just Patreon?
Yeah.
But we want to figure out how you got to the
Parole.
Judge. Yes, that resentenced you. Is it the same judge who sentenced you?
No. So he had gone into different districts and different courts. He was still around, but he no longer was in the district that I was in. The way that I got to a resentencing hearing is through a convergence of things. One is they had started a new policy in CDCR that if the department sees fit, they'll write a brief that gets sent down to the courts, asking the courts to reconsider you for resentencing. I mean, asking the courts to consider you for resentencing. And I forget the name of it, but your file has to go to Sacramento and all these different things. And Joe Pertel found this out. It's a very quiet thing in the institution. Nobody really knew about it. It had been in effect for like 5 years or something, but nobody knew about it because they didn't really activate it.
Do you have to have your lawyer ask the department?
No, it can be anybody in the institute. It can be a free staff. It can be, but it has to come from somebody.
In the Department of Corrections, right?
Yeah. Well, Joe had another person that he was representing at the time who somehow this all came up. And so what he did was he sent my file to the sergeant that was the person in charge of all of that in Sacramento and gave him my file, right? He said, "You guys got to check this dude out."
Yeah.
And so they did. And they checked it out and they decided that they felt it was up. You know, they were like,
Wow.
what's this dude's got to like, how does he even have life? You know, this how the department felt.
Yeah.
And then from the moment that I dropped out, I never had 115 after.
No tickets.
None. So the thing was that all the way up to the point of that, I had extensive write-ups. I never had one, like, what do they call it again? I can't even remember what the language behind a series. I never had all of my write-ups have all been serious write-ups, right? And then all of a sudden when I dropped out, from then on, all you saw was progression in my file. And so they were like, there was now way more years of me living a life.
Good behavior.
Yeah. And also like quiet accomplishments.
Yeah.
Like I never was the one that tried to like be on the executive body of like a self-help group, right? Instead, I liked going into them, all types of ones. I've been to so many different, and I liked just participating. But what it did was it allowed for me to be able to like quietly build a reputation of somebody who's trying to improve.
Yeah.
You know, and trying to do better and break this, whatever these cycles and these statistics are that we put ourselves into, you know, and or that we find ourselves in. And so they recommended me. But this is weird though, because when they recommended me, COVID hit. And so I had no idea that they had recommended me. The judge, the file got lost throughout COVID. Because, you know, COVID was
oh my God,
for people inside and like that. The courts shut down completely for like 2 years, you know? And so everybody got put on ice. And then what happened was Gascon got elected into office as the district attorney of LA, right? That guy that came down from San Francisco. Right. A lot of people blame a lot of like what's going on in Los Angeles and the crime and all of that on Gascon. I feel like he gets a bad rap for it because I feel like law enforcement in a lot of ways, I feel like they politicked against Gascon in the streets. Like they would not necessarily do what they're supposed to do. And then they'd be like, what's the point? It's on Gascon. Whereas Gascon was never saying, I'm just going to let him go, arrest him, bring him in, and then we'll really go through it. But they were so adamant on being against Gascon that this is just the way that I think that they do it, you know? But anyways, Gascon got elected into office and he started combing through all of he put together a committee to go through everything because LA had such a reputation for being corrupt when it came to all of what was going on. And the first people that he started was juveniles. And then I was one of those first juveniles because I was also somebody that didn't have a violent crime, meaning somebody didn't get hurt, you know, physically, which put me at the top of the list. And I had such an extensive sentence. So Gascon said that they weren't going to contest me being resentenced, right? And then what happened was, and all this happened separately. And then what happened was Loyola Marymount, Joe Pertel took my stuff to Loyola and got with the JIFS and they read my file and were immediately in. And so they then represented me. And they're such a well-respected organization throughout the country and in the state of California that they have deep relationships with district attorney, with courts, with judges, and all these different things. And so they went on the path. Before I even went into resentencing, for probably about a year, they started placing everything that they possibly could in my, you know, to try to build something to where we went in as a united front, meaning district attorney, CDCR, and Tyler Corcoran, right? To say to this judge, hey, this guy, if anybody, deserves a second chance. You know, you gave him more time than Charles Manson, literally. Yeah. So they tried to get it out of Lancaster court because Lancaster is known as a cowboy court of LA County.
Dusty, corrupt, petty.
And they
impoverished.
They also have impoverished. They have one of the highest crime rates. It's bad. So we couldn't get it out of there. The judge saw it, and the judge told everybody, I'm not going to remove the life sentence. I'm going to I'm going to re-sentence him to be immediately eligible for the parole board. I was heartbroken. My family was heartbroken because we were already eligible for the parole board underneath SB 260. And I was going to be going to that in like another, maybe like a year. I think I was away, maybe from that.
Because that was like 20 years, right?
Yeah, you got to go on your 20th year.
Right.
Yeah. So
did you feel confident that if you went to the board, that you could get out?
Yeah, because I felt like this. I felt like I watched a bunch of people go to parole board and I said to myself, if that right there can get a grant, I can.
Yeah.
Because I live with that person on the yard. And the difference between me and them is they may be able to articulate all of these things and they may be able to talk the talk, but the difference is that doesn't walk it. Yeah. So if that person can get a parole date, I know that I can eventually. I don't know if it was going to be the first time or anything, but I definitely felt like I could, if given a chance. So when she said that, this judge, obviously we were heartbroken, and she said that she was going to give me an opportunity to speak in court, and so I agreed to address the court and stuff like that when the time came, and I practiced my speech. Right, I wrote my speech. I spent months on it, and I was really wanting to touch on a few different things. Right, I wasn't wanting to touch on trying to convince her to let me go. I was wanting to touch on gratitude, remorse, amends, and my change. That's it. Yeah. And I wanted to do one of the things that I regretted later on in my life that I didn't do from the beginning, which was just tell everybody how sorry I was. Right? Like, as time went by, I wished that I could have told these innocent people that, like, I'm so sorry, man, for just barging into your life and putting everybody in jeopardy, and all this happened to me, my family, all this stuff happened. None of it needed to, So, like, that's what I saw the opportunity at this court hearing to be.
It's cathartic just to be able to say sorry.
Yeah, just to say it, right? Yeah. That's the thing. That's when you learn that, as time goes by, when you're reflecting on when I'm reflecting on my life, that's what I learned, right? Was that it is cathartic and it's healing to own up and take accountability for yourself and be responsible.
Yeah.
So I worked on it, and I worked on it to the point of where I practiced that thing to where other people memorized it. I used to go up to random dudes. I'd be in the day room watching boxing, right? Because I was teaching boxing and all this stuff, right? And I'd be watching boxing, and then I'd go, you see what that guy did, man? I go, you know what? That kind of reminds me of, and I would just go into my speech, right? And the reason why was because I wanted to be as comfortable as possible to pull up on it.
Yeah.
And so then we find out that there's no transfers. I'm not going to go down to court. I was so relieved. I did not want to go back down to the county, for this. And it was over. I was going to have a Zoom or a Skype.
Yeah.
So I was practicing it on the phone because I was like, they're always talking about how Skype is glitching and like this. You know what happens? Skype glitched. And so I had my whole hearing on the telephone in the program office.
Wow.
They called me into the program office. They put me on the phone with the judge. My dad is in the courtroom, right? And she addresses me. She goes into saying everything about how she's not going to remove the life sentence and like this and that and da-da-da. And what I do is very serious. And she asked me what I wanted to say. And I addressed the court. I spoke for about 3 minutes. She took a 20-minute recess, came back, reversed everything, removed the life sentences, sent me home. And 10 days later, I walked out of the institution. Yeah.
A miracle.
Not even a lifer anymore.
Wow.
Yeah. She completely dropped all the life charges and everything.
Going in saying, I'm not going to remove the life sentence.
Yeah. Completely.
That must have been, did you save that speech? Do you still have it memorized? I have the
speech. Yeah. So I know, and I don't. I just remember the key points, right?
Right.
But my dad said, because he was in the courtroom and he said that, and I remember when I felt when I was in the zone.
Yeah.
Because I also went, I didn't necessarily practice it so that way I could just memorize the speech. I practiced it so that way I would stay on track when I'm being authentic and going off the rails, right?
Yeah.
Like I could always come back knowing where I'm at in my speech, even if I'm gone, right?
Yep.
So I talked about a lot of other stuff, but what happened was I remember hearing all of these papers being, like I could hear the courtroom, right? Because they're doing all of their types of, right? It's like you can hear like traffic court in there and stuff, right? Like
that's so
there's attorneys, there's people, they're like rustling papers.
Who's listening on just the judge?
It's on the speaker in the courtroom.
But who else is there?
The entire court. Random people. It's a public court. You could even go and pull up what I said probably in transcripts.
But why are there other people in the courtroom?
Because it's just a courtroom. So like a courtroom is public, it's open, right? Unless they close it for a particular thing. You have to file for that type of stuff.
I see.
So you have, and you know, it's so overcrowded.
Yeah.
They don't have time to close down everything. You got 5 other people right there, you know, dealing with stuff too. And you have attorneys that are waiting, that are in the court.
I see.
You have the clerk, you have all different types of stuff.
It's chaotic. And you're trying to prove yourself on a prison phone.
But here's the crazy thing is that as soon as I dropped in, within 3 minutes, it goes dead silent. And I knew in my heart, man, within 30 seconds of this, I knew I was in the zone and that something was happening very special. And I finished what I had to say, and she just was like, I need a 20-minute recess, and then went dead on the line. And I just like looked at the officer that was right there, and he's like, what happened? I was like crying, and I was like, oh, no, she just said she needed a 20-minute recess. And he told me, he goes, if I was a judge, I'd let you go, because this is an amazing, just, you that was so amazing what you said, you know, in this way. And so I was chopping with him. My dad in the courtroom said that what happened was she was ruffling papers. And as soon as when I started to go in, at some point, all of a sudden, her head snapped over to the speaker and she put the papers down and she leaned in. And the rest of the room fell silent. And that my dad starts asking the attorneys what's going on. And the attorneys turned around to him and they go, we don't know. And they go, I think he's changing her mind. Like that.
Wow.
And then sure enough, man, she came back and reversed everything.
Unbelievable.
And when she told me, she said, she came back on and she said, you know, it's a very serious thing and this and that and da-da-da. And she goes, there's a lot of people that believe in you in this courtroom today. And I believe in you as well. And I'm going to use my authority to remove the life sentence. Da-da-da-da. And as soon as she said that, I felt every like cell, like my hair follicles even, it was past tingle. It was just like, it was numb. I couldn't even hear what she was saying anymore. I held my breath because I was so afraid of like somehow messing up what she was saying, you know? And then all of a sudden she goes, well, good luck, Mr. Corcoran, hangs up.
Boom.
And I'm just back on the yard. Wow. And the officer asked me what happened. And I go, she just removed the life sentence and sentenced me to time served. I'm going home. And I was flooded with tears.
Yeah.
And he was like, wow, man, that was one of the most amazing things. And so I get up and I walk out onto the yard and I had 2 buddies of mine that were right there waiting. And they see me and I cry even harder when I saw them because, you know, I just known these guys for years. Yeah. And they were like, what happened? I said, I'm going home. And they threw their arms around me and people flooded out from the buildings. People I didn't even know, like I didn't realize the impact that I had actually had on my community, you know?
Yeah.
You know, all the times I cut people hair and listened and mentored people and like all this different stuff, you know, and just, and a lot of guys really, in my own way of thinking about the way that I like to think about it, is they really saw me as their champion.
Yeah.
Because the moment that I made my change, I stuck to it. And a lot of guys relapse and go back and forth. And even inside of a lifestyle, they just go back and forth. But I didn't. And the other part about it was I was no punk, you know?
No, you never
like,
told.
I held my mud.
Always stayed solid.
I went through all that shit. Yeah. And even in the place of where I said, man, I'm all about love and kindness and compassion and like saying that on the yard, there was times where people would try to implement their into my life and they would see the side of me that doesn't put up with that.
Yeah.
And people would be like, man, Tyler's a real man.
Yeah.
And so all these people came out and I had ice creams and sodas and chips and they talked till my voice was hoarse. Wow. And then that night I finally like collapse on the bunk at count time and I fall asleep. And then I wake up at like 2 a.m, wide awake, and tears are flooding down my eyes. I woke up crying. Tears are flooding down my eyes and I looked up at the ceiling and my life flashed. Everything from the very beginning of my life, from my earliest memories out in the desert, all the way up to all my time in prison. And I remember I just looked around me and I just started to say, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Internally, I was just going, thank you, thank you, thank you, to try to like deal with this, you know, skydiving of emotion.
Yeah, that's it.
You know? And it was wild because the clerk up the paperwork. They then set my parole date at like another 6 months. I told my dad, they're never letting me out of this. I'm just going to grow my beard and my hair and not worry about it anymore, man. And he goes, that doesn't sound right. So he told Loyola. Loyola said, that's not supposed to happen. They immediately started making all the calls and they had to do an emergency release. And I got released the day before Thanksgiving, 11/24 of, what was it, 2001, I believe.
You know, I got released. Oh, no, I was right after Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
It's a good time to come home.
We didn't want to get stuck because you get stuck for like those 2 weeks when administration shuts down.
Right.
But they couldn't do that because they had messed up. The clerk went on vacation with the paperwork. And so all this happened. And that's just so wild how something as simple as that.
Clerical error
can put you in there. What if something crazy would have happened?
What if something had kicked off?
Yeah. I mean, thank God I was in, camp at that time,
Right.
Like
so you'd already
camp.
Okay. So where were you at?
So I was at Chuckawalla at the time.
Okay.
It was a level 2 out in Chuckawalla. It's down by like Blythe in the low desert, past Palm Springs and all that.
Right.
Yeah. I was on a level 2. It was easy.
Did your dad pick you up?
Oh yeah, they had like a Mercedes Sprint van, because my dad went on to, he started out just like driving dozers and at a dump, and then he became like a site manager. But he worked his way all the way up to become like the director of operations for the entire corporation.
Wow.
Yeah. So he while I was in, he continued to climb in his work.
Yeah.
And so they picked me up, dude, and I still have the same push button phone that they gave me and stuff. I got to get a new one now. It's like busted on the back and stuff. And then I did I started to do a little bit of artwork, but I couldn't be inside. Art wasn't going to be a thing. I do it now again, right? Even while I've been on the road, I do all types of portraits and stuff and, make a little side cash with it. But I couldn't take it on in the way that you need to as a career. I was like, I need to be outside.
Yeah.
I need some sun, open the door and walk out. And I was like, you know what, man, I'm going to go to a gym. And I walked into a gym, and 3 months I was there. 3 months later, I had tripled the membership. I was working for it.
Wow.
Yeah.
A gym in Hollywood, right?
It was in Woodland Hills, called
Woodland
Phil
Hills.
Paulina's. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, old Italian guy. And then we got into it because he was like, I was only getting paid I was getting paid under the table. I told him I got to be on the payroll, man. I'm like, yo, I got to build credit. I have no credit. I have no financial history. I have nothing. I can't.
Yeah.
I need to start building some form of record.
Right.
So that way, if I want to get a car, I can go in and get a car and all these different things. I was learning about all of that. But he was, he was kind of taking advantage of me. It was all good.
Yeah.
And because, I walked out of it. And but before that happened though, man, one of the clients, this guy Kyrie, man, he tells me he's a fireman. I think he's a fire lieutenant out in LA County. And he says, yo, man, I want you to go train my brother, man. He's going to love you, but he'll never come to the gym, dude, and would you do a house call? And I'm like, yeah, you know my story. I don't be sure though. I just don't know I've never done a house call. And he's like, he's going to love you, man. Don't even trip. And so I was like, all right. So he gives me the address and I drive there. And next thing you know, I'm like in Bel Air and I'm like, oh, you're like, wow.
Yeah.
And I get out and this guy, Jay Brown, man, he, which was his brother, who's the, he's like CEO of the Rock Nation and all of that.
Oh, wow.
He came up with
Wild.
Jay-Z and all them. Yeah. So I start training Jay. I start training Emory Jones and met Tata and all them.
Yeah.
Embraced by that whole family.
Yeah.
I was on parole. They wanted to fly me out after the Hamptons. And I was like, couldn't do it because I was on parole.
Yeah.
And then they sent me up with Corey Gamble and with the Kardashians. I started to go up to Hidden Hills and train him.
Yeah.
And then it just continued to open up from there, man. And the next day I was at Craft, and then I was doing this and doing that. I started all types of youth programs. I was on the news. One of my students got attacked by some homeless dude, this kid in Agora. And so the news comes and I was the one that he was my student. He comes in crying and he's like, Coach T, and this and that. And the fellas get that news, so they all saw me.
Oh, yeah.
I was like, they were like, feel about that? I'm like, what is this community coming to?
Yeah. Lock these people up.
Yeah, but you know what? If you want to deal with it, come on down to Craft Boxing Club and learn some real self-defense.
Yeah, right.
But
so Craft was the name of your boxing club?
Yeah, Craft is where I went over to next. George Foreman III opened it. And
he just died.
His dad
did. Rest in peace.
Yeah. No, George is a good friend of mine, man. He put me on over at his gym, said it was the most amazing thing, And so then I start working in that gym and And then it exploded from there. And then that's where I met Steph.
Yep.
Everybody was wanting me to podcast, things like that, but I wasn't really doing it. And then that's how I got initially introduced to Steph. It was through a mutual friend was like, hey, Steph's into podcasting, and if you have questions about her or whatever, she's a good person to be talking to about it. And then I just fell in love with Steph.
Yeah.
And
then you guys have a daughter?
She got pregnant, and we have a beautiful son.
Yes.
He's amazing. He's just the most cutest, best kid. He was born at home. I caught him on the way out, just like I was, and how my dad did for me.
Wow.
And it's been a very, very amazing. It's the best thing ever happened to my life.
I mean, and this is like the course of like 4 years? 3.5 years?
3.5. It'll be 4 in November.
Wow.
Yeah. So
what do you contribute that to? Like what do you?
I feel like the universe loves me.
Yeah.
And I feel like, no, I don't say that from a place of like arrogance. Yeah. I feel like it's because I really do my best, man, to try to put myself last and do the right thing.
Yeah.
And I feel like when you do that, opportunities happen. But then you have to be the type of person that then can accept the opportunity, right?
Yeah.
You have to, so then that's where all the hard work, that's where everything I've been through, it all cycles and it all reinforces each other. Yeah. And it's all in that. And then the other part about it is even things like us shutting down everything. I had just made another jump. My first year I made like 14 grand, right? My second year I made like 120 grand. And then this last year before I shut it down, I was getting ready I was projecting that just my private business of me doing house calls and stuff was going to be almost at 200 grand. And so this progression was taking place. And at the height of it, we decided to shut it all down and drive off across the country, put everything in storage, close out our lease early. And you know what ended up happening? That house burns down in Malibu.
Oh, and the fires, that's right.
That house burned down. We would have lost everything. Everything. Wow. The people that rented after us didn't even have time to get their cars out of there, man. So the other part I feel like that contributes to the trajectory of my life is also that same person that was willing to push through the fear of going out and still go out onto the yard is that same person that is willing to push through the fear of what if it all doesn't work out, right? And instead trust the fact that that if it doesn't work out, then I'll be able to handle it and we'll make the right adjustments to then make it work out, right? And I'm not attached to it in that way. I'm not attached to a dream in that way.
Right.
I'm open to the experiences. And for me, I don't look at it from this perspective of how do I get money to just quickly be responsible or stable? Because what I've realized is whether or not you're barely making money or whether or not you're a millionaire in Bel Air, a lot of people get consumed by that.
Sure.
Everything becomes about the money and it becomes about fear around it. Is there going to be enough? Will you make the wrong decision with it? Will you do all these different things? And I'm more about the experience of life. I'm more about what can I do in order to enrich myself through my experiences in life? And how can I help facilitate that? And then that's what motivates me to get money, as opposed to how do I get money to do these things? Instead, when the opportunity comes to do these things, I'll figure out how to make the money to make it happen when it happens. Wow. Kind of.
Your choice to just pack up, close your gym and get a van and drive across the country with your family, it was like the decision you made to just that one day when the counselor was like, hey, you sure you want to go to Pelican Bay? And you're like, no, I think I'll drop out. Yeah, let's just do it.
Yeah. Yeah, because there's a certain level of I used to I worked really hard at not being impulsive because impulsivity contributed so much to my chaotic and destructive life as a kid. But then as time went by, I felt like when you quelch impulsivity too much, you become robotic, right? And you lose a little bit of the human experience through trying to just be responsible and not impulsive.
Yeah.
Whereas what I wanted to do was I wanted to get to a place where I could trust myself again. So that way, if I impulsively made a decision, it was never going to be something that resulted in me getting life in prison.
Right.
Right. There may be a mistake that takes place, but that it's not going to have that level of impact.
Right.
And then that gives me the freedom sometimes to be able to then follow the impulse.
Sure.
Because I got to the place of where I actually trust that.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And I'm still figuring it all out. You know, it's always an active process. I mean, it's always, you know, I'm processing it as it goes. Steph's a huge part of that. You know, Steph is another one that was like, you know, I remember when we first met and I was working a bunch. I was like running classes from like 4 a.m. to 9 p.m. type of thing. And that's a hard job.
Yeah.
You got to always be motivating other people, right? Like all these different things. And my voice was hoarse and all this stuff. And I was like, and she goes, why don't you like play with your days off? I'm like, yeah, but I got Saturdays and Sundays. Like I worked really hard to make sure that I got Saturday and Sundays. We know are like prime days off. Yeah. Like everybody thinks you want a job. Who wants like a Tuesday and a Wednesday day off, right? And she was like, well, do you feel more active on a Saturday as opposed to like on a Monday? And I'm like, well, I don't know. And she's like, why don't you just try messing with that? Why don't you just take Sunday and Monday off? Well, I can't do that, but I could. I was running my own shit. Yeah. At any time, I can just start to make those decisions. So I did. And really, man, she challenged me in a lot of ways to be creative with the way that I looked at my work and my time off and my hours and what was valuable to me and all those different things. And she was probably single-handedly the most influential person in where I've gotten to at this part, right, with everything. She also was the most influential in making me, in helping me to believe in myself when it comes to my creativity, when it comes to my ability as an artist, right? You know, next thing you know, I'm having a meeting at the Soho House over writing a TV show. Like, where does this come in play with people that are big, people wait hard, they work super hard. They try to climb all they can for that to happen. Now, who knows if it'll ever go? It doesn't matter though, you know, it's just this, but she really did that because my family was really hard on me, you know? And a lot of people live in fear and fear for others and that type of thing. And I had to really push past my family and make them feel uncomfortable in a lot of different ways. And I'm so sorry for doing so, but at the same time, it was necessary. And we're all, you know, everybody's fine now, but it was really difficult. And I've really struggled and continue sometimes with like imposter syndrome. And, you know, because sometimes I'm like, who am I? I'm just a dude from the joint. You know, I'm in a place where I'm like, you know, coaching and teaching or doing this or doing that. And, you know, who am I? You know, and then I have to tell myself like, nah, you're a bad man.
Yeah,
you did a lot of and you put in a lot of work, man, and all this different stuff. And you need to give yourself a little more credit than that.
You do.
And I'm saying all of that because it reminds me of something I wanted to say earlier where I also had to admit to myself at some point, I never wanted to be looked at as a victim and I never wanted to think of myself as a victim. But there was at some point on the outside where I needed to heal from how all those adults treated me and how they all did me, right, when I was a kid. You know, and these judges and these attorneys and these district attorneys and these parents and these, like, all these people that have been to college and are educated and all this shit, and shame on you for getting this lost ass kid in here because you guys know the difference. You know? And shame on you guys for doing this to me and treating me as an example. And part of my sense of feeling like a badass is like, I showed all you that you guys are wrong and that there's more than one narrative, right? There's a whole community of people that are on the inside that value emotional intelligence, that value change, that want to be empathetic, that have remorse for the things that they've done, all of that. And you don't see much of that conversation. You usually see either being glorified or like, you know, everybody wants to hear the war stories. And I just feel proud to be a part of that population and to be able to give some voice to it, for sure.
This has been a remarkable interview. And I'm really glad to know you. And it's helped me a lot just listening to you.
Thanks.
do you want people to like follow you? Like what's next? Like, are you going to?
Yeah, you can follow me, right? I don't even remember what my Instagram is, like T_Corcoran or something like that. Maybe
we got to work on that a little bit.
Yeah, I got like 3 posts on the thing. Although I post on my story all the time. And if you love it, you like being able to see my son, who's hilarious, and all the different cool that we do, Steph and I, and all types of stuff.
Do you have a plan for what's next? I mean, I know you're working on a TV show in Hollywood, but you're going back to LA. It sounds like
this is the first of me implementing the speaking aspect.
Yeah.
On the inside, I did a lot of it, right? Where I was also part of like this organization called the Straight Life Program. I talked to students. I did a lot of stuff. So I feel like public speaking is going to be a part of it. I definitely want to pursue it. Yeah, man, I'm going to write a book. And then I'm just going to see what kind of opportunities and collaborations people want to have. I want people to be like, yo, man, I see value in you, and let's do this. And like let's come up with it and do stuff together. Create. Yeah. And so, you know, for other people that want to work hard and be creative and but at the same time have a good time through it, you know?
That's it.
And realize that there's enough for everybody and that we all can get to that place. Those are the people I'm talking to.
Tyler Corcoran, White Crip. Tyler Corcoran, dude.
That's right.
Wow, White Crip and also Buddha. Wow, that is so powerful. Thanks, buddy. Well, look, we're going to flip over to the Patreon now and just try to figure out something else to talk about just for a half an hour or so. But thank you, thank you. And thank you to Steph for loaning you out for a whole afternoon.
Yeah.
I really, really, really appreciate it. You're going to do great things. I mean, you already have, but you're going to do great things.
Thanks, brother. And anytime I'm back in Austin,
please,
you know what I mean? We'll hang out.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah. Thanks, man. Thank you guys. We'll see you over at Patreon.
All right.